Welcome to the Occult Rejects. Today, we got a very special guest on. We had him on once before, and the guy was spitting fire the whole time. So I definitely wanted to get him on for this topic. Definitely fits the occult, and it fits true crime, which we do touch on here often as well. But before we introduce Austin, we got Lisa, the Occult Reject Mad Scientist, joining me today. How are you?
I am good. I am very excited to be here. One, to talk about Delphi. Two, to finally meet Austin. Heard a couple of his appearances on other shows, and spitting fire. And I mainly liked the one where he was on y'all's on this episode, y'all's episode, on this podcast, and he definitely was just dropping all kinds of knowledge shrapnel on y'all. It was good, so I'm really excited about that. I just want to plug occultresearchinstitute.org. We have a couple of contributors from the Rejects that contribute to it, and so check us out on occultresearchinstitute.org.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Lisa. Definitely appreciate you joining us. And yeah, if people haven't heard it before, Austin was on here covering the Solar Temple with us, so definitely check that out. That was some great stuff right there. And Austin, please, for the people who may not know who you are yet, please let them know where they can find all your amazing stuff, and let them know what your deal is.
Awesome, brother. Thank you, man. And I appreciate you both for the kind words, and also for having me back on. It means the world to me, brother. And you guys can find me at the Underclass Podcast, but and the best place to support me, patreon.com/the Underclass Podcast. But yeah, I'm very grateful for opportunities like this, because again, it's like the whole reason that I started my podcast was to meet like-minded individuals, right? That I could have an open-minded and objective conversation with, and whether we agree on every last detail or not, that's not the concern. You know what I mean? It's like
something's
it's more
wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I only wish that more people were willing to kind of like engage and embrace that mindset, because I think that it's the most important way to approach life and ideas in general, because that is I think the struggle in terms of the environment we find ourselves in at this moment. The layers of deception, right, are very well and systematically entrenched, honestly, at this point. And so I personally just, I became fed up with the fact that so many of these official narratives surrounding these cases that obviously have, in my mind, so many of them are still very relevant to this day, because it's proof positive of the sort of misdirection that the system kind of inherently has baked in terms of the smoke and mirrors. And so my attempt is always to break through, pierce the veil, bridge the gap between conspiracy and hopefully some sort of corroborative evidence and credibility that we can lend to alternative theories and narratives that seem far more plausible than that of the official narrative that we're intended to embrace at face value. And I'm very blessed and grateful for the fact that I had like some core values and legitimate critical thinking skills at a younger age. I think that, I rejected like this public schooling system just naturally, and I'm very grateful for that as well. I don't know, it's kind of strange, but I do see fundamental similarities between myself and others within this sort of alternative media landscape that we at the very least, the circles that we swim in. You know what I mean? And so I will say that I just appreciate you guys as always, and any time that we can have a conversation like this, it further inspires me, provides me with some sort of legitimate hope for the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But man, I don't know, the Delphi murders, like I was unaware. And as always, when I begin to just attempt to really just figure out, I really go to the sort of like, I bring various ideas the workshop in my own mind, and I try and sift through what I think is potentially, the direction I would like to take, and then I sort of like naturally am pulled in these very similar directions that seem to represent and provide a window into a very similar playbook that seems to resurface over time in many of these cases. And so with Delphi, I essentially was attempting to kind of make a sort of parallel to the first season of True Detective, and I discovered the Hosanna Church scandal and then the Delphi murders. And I really viewed that there was a very interesting, direct parallel and sort of symbolic reference point to the very first scene in the original series of True Detective, the first season, right? And very strange synchronicities regarding the original victim in that opening scene. And so for everyone, as far as just, I think it's important to understand that you have like legitimate neo-pagan organizations to this very day in modern day in this landscape that we reside in, that they exercise ritualized murder and blood sacrifice that they believe requires the use of ancient runes by various groups, as far as who these various groups tend to believe in the magical elements of neo-paganism, right? In many ways. And now that it seems to kind of like reveal itself in different ways depending on the group. But at the same time, I did find this fascinating because obviously the tragic murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German, they share these shocking similarities to this original crime scene, right? And so for anyone who is unaware, obviously these girls, they were hiking on the Mononhigh Bridge Trail in Delphi, Indiana, right? And I myself personally, I believe there's also no coincidence in terms of the location, Delphi. I think Delphi, the Oracle at Delphi, I think that in general and inherently it has occult connotations, I think, to it. So understanding really the way that some of these sort of cult organizations function, just in terms of like the Son of Sam case, for example, with David Berkowitz, I always found it interesting that they would legitimately sort of utilize these not only occult holidays where they would stage the actual crime or execution, targeted assassination around, but they would also have this very interesting symbolic nature that was built in to the crime itself, outside of the Elephas Club, right? Which has occult connotations to itself again. And so I personally, I do believe that when there is this playbook that is very much being executed in terms of an actual occult factor being involved, then I definitely believe that, there's clearly a reason that you would pursue that investigative thread. And so that's where I found myself with the Delphi case is observing these strange synchronicities regarding the original victim in that first scene. And so the way that I kind of like introduce it is essentially that, by the way, I think it could be referred to as a copycat imitation crime in a way, the Delphi case, because it's seemingly duplicated in more ways than one, right? In Delphi, on February 13th, 2017 is when the bodies are discovered, right? In the first episode of True Detective, the initial victim's body was found in a sugarcane field, right? Her corpse had been staged against a tree as if in prayer, with her head crowned with deer antlers and her body surrounded by twig lattice works, which closely resembled these Cajun bird traps, right? And this disturbing triangular crooked spiral, cryptic, of course, was carved into the back of the murder victim. And it's the exact same symbol used by pedophiles to indicate their preference in little boys. So that is according to the FBI, as far as the symbol itself is known as the Little Boy Lover logo. And that all was revealed, honestly, in my Pizzagate episode. I discussed how basically the FBI had proven these symbols and had kind of made them public. And so that is another case, is that we could always imagine that once these symbols had been made public, obviously you're going to have a pivot in terms of the criminal enterprise. And so it was in 2007 when WikiLeaks released the document, the FBI document that detailed that secret pedophile code, right? And how they would communicate secretly. And so it's just very unfortunate when you realize that that is the exact same symbol, but not at all shocking, because I think there's so much of that occurs, very often. So, but these murders, their bodies of Liberty German and Abigail Williams, they're discovered near this Monenhigh Bridge Trail, which is part of the Delphi Historic Trails. And after they had disappeared from that trail, it was only, I think, 24 hours, I believe. And so it was the previous day, and that they had disappeared. And so then you have this extensive media coverage that takes place and ensues after the bodies are discovered. And it was in part due to these audio and basically audio recordings and video recordings that were released by the authorities, right? And that basically came directly from Liberty German's smartphone, right? Which I believe there was a recording of the killer. You can even still watch this day, right? And it's the Down the Hill, right? And there's even a potential reference to where you hear a gun, which allegedly. But again, there's a shorter version that was released to the public, and then there's an actual longer version that allegedly, and so it's very interesting. But there's a timeline that was released, and apparently it was on February 13th, 2017, when 13-year-old Abigail Joyce Williams and 14-year-old Liberty Rose Lynn German were dropped off by German's older sister, Kelsey, on County Road 300 North, east of the Hoosier Heartland Highway. And so these girls are hiking the Monenhigh Bridge Trail, and this is at 2:07, around 2:07 in the afternoon, when she posted a photo of her friend Williams walking the bridge, Abigail. And so Liberty posted this photo, I believe it was on Snapchat. And just after this post, in 2:07 p.m., they're not heard from again. And so that's when they're reported missing, like a couple hours later. I think it's 5:30. And so apparently the families, they're searching for the girls themselves. They finally call the police after time passes. And so whenever it's police, they don't initially release any of the details of how the girls were murdered, which is also interesting because that begins to surface, not too long after you have investigators who are actually making statements, as if there's one statement that's most important that caught my attention, which was clearly that the FBI agent believed that the bodies had been staged. But still, I think it's important to at least mention the fact that there was a tip line that was established, obviously, and you have this grainy photograph that appeared to capture this man, hands in his pockets, head down, walking on the rail bridge towards the girls. And the person in the photograph was dubbed the bridge guy, right? And he was named the prime suspect in this double homicide. And on February 22nd, law enforcement released an audio recording during which the voice of the suspect was muffled, but is heard to say, as I mentioned, down the hill. And at a news conference, officials credit the source of the audio and imagery to German's phone. So that is where you get the connection to her smartphone and the actual video of the bridge guy. And so she's then sort of, as far as like the police, they indicate that additional evidence from the phone had been secured but wouldn't be released, and further details because essentially it would compromise the future trial, right? And so after this, you get, I think it's by July 17th, there's a composite sketch of someone sought as a person of prime interest in the murders. And the sketch was apparently created from eyewitness accounts of a hiker on the Delphi historic trails. And this is the day the girls had vanished. So Indiana State Police on April 22nd, 2019, 2 years later, this is when they announce a new direction in the case, right? and it's released a new sketch of the suspect that looked entirely different from the original, which I found interesting as well, because the first picture was that of a very young individual, which to me personally makes a lot of sense once you find out how the girls were potentially procured, or at least put into position on the Mona High Bridge Trail that day. I think it legitimately does potentially directly connect to Anthony Shots, who is Keegan Klein. Anthony Shots is the Anthony_Shots is the Snapchat profile that was utilized by Keegan Klein. But I think there's no way that he didn't have a role to play in the context of this case. And so I definitely believe that. And so this makes a lot of sense to me as to why there's an additional sketch that's released. And
hold on, let me get my shit.
What's up, brother? I did find it interesting that they established this tip line, obviously, and so then you have an abandoned vehicle, right? That's found near the area, abandoned off the Hoosier Heartland Highway in Delphi, and this is I think at the former Child Services office, and that it was discovered. And so there's these strange connections that begin to kind of link to this individual by the name of Logan, right? Which I found very strange, because it doesn't seem like he was ever considered a legitimate suspect. Ronald Logan is his name, and he inevitably died in 2020. But I just think that I understand he's very old at the time. I believe he was 77, I think, which that is interesting. The number itself caught my attention. Yeah.
Right.
Because
something
again,
I wanted to say,
ahead,
sorry to interrupt you. It's just,
no, not at all.
I just want to ask you, like, your opinion, Lisa, maybe even Tyrone, if he knows even about this case or anything. Well, it's almost kind of an overall thing I think is done regardless. You know, the stuff that I feel like that they put out, you know, that audio stuff and that video evidence, we're supposed to, like, first off, there's no context to, like, why was this girl even recording something at that point?
Exactly.
You know, like, I have like, if you ever sometimes look at, like, stuff either like in the news or true crime, sometimes you're given this video or this audio stuff, and there is, like, no context behind it. It's almost like, here you go, have fucking fun with this and come up with whatever fucktard shit you want to start believing and start spreading around the internet. It's almost as if it's like, we're going to give you some shit that really has nothing to do with it, and we're just going to let you take off with it. Because it's like even other things, like sometimes when we're seeing stuff on the internet and we're taking it as real, it's like, did you notice that all of a sudden there was even a different angle of screenshot now? Like,
right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, this isn't what you really think it is. This isn't reality. This was actually produced. You know, and it's just like, I wonder, like, with this type of case, I feel like the information they gave you between that and their sketches of the people, none of it makes sense.
And all the while they host this press conference, they reveal this secondary sketch, this new sketch, and announce an entirely different direction, a new direction in the case, while they're urging the public, right, to look at the new sketch, listen to the audio, watch how the man walks on the bridge, and send tips to the tip line email. And that in itself felt like it was, you know, kind of like they were engaging the internet sleuths in a way, you know, which I do feel like is a new phenomena in a certain extent, to a certain extent.
Huge on YouTube, I think. YouTube,
right?
is,
Absolutely, man.
That Lisa were, was kind of getting that before. You will see, like, certain shows almost kind of like create the narrative on some of these topics, and none of them ever want to touch the fucking occult at all.
Nope.
It's very weird.
Yeah, I think it is definitely, I think, a window into the tactical and strategic misdirection. Potentially, you could even leverage and exploit the public to, you know, facilitate that misdirection, and that very much seems like it could have been a part of this case specifically, due to the fact that I think so many of the authorities are potentially compromised in terms of how they sort of pivoted to, especially considering how Richard Allen even becomes a targeted and priority suspect. I mean, that in itself is so strange, right? And so you have 5 years after the murders, right? In September 2022, this is when investigators review this misfiled tip after allegedly a volunteer file clerk discovered this error, which instantly that's a red flag to me. So in this tip, a man by the name of Richard Allen self-reported 3 days after the murders to being on the trails. And the reason I mentioned that abandoned vehicle that was at the Child Services office near the Mona High Bridge Trail is because it was abandoned between noon and 5 p.m. on the day of the murders, which they claim, obviously, 2:07 p.m. was the last time the Snapchat was, was utilized, and of course, Liberty's Snapchat profile had taken that video, obviously. And so that's the claim, that they disappeared just after this. So that's within that window of time, obviously, which provides the opportunity. But I did want to say, what's up, Rebirth of the World, my brother? How you doing, man? It's nice to meet you. What is your name?
Rebirth of the Word, Tyrone. I'm sorry,
Tyrone.
y'all. For some reason on my calendar, it said 1 p.m. I don't know why my computer's having trouble with syncing with my phone. So I'm thinking I'm going to have to just go through my phone.
Oh, man.
Yeah, no, I have heard that happen. So, yeah. Yeah. Sorry. But you made it anyway, sir.
Yeah. I was, I always try to come like 20 minutes early, and I was like, "What the heck? They already started."
I was like, maybe he's not home because I know you were away too. So I was just like, oh, I don't know, maybe he.
No, I definitely. I was looking at because I was outside cutting the grass, and I kept getting notification. I was like, I still have like 30, 40 minutes. What is it talking about? And I came in here, and I looked at my computer, and my calendars both of them weren't syncing together. So I'm just going to start going off of my phone. I think because yesterday I had a major update on my PC, and I think that's what probably set it off.
Oh, no. That makes sense.
But yeah, I do know about the Delphi murders. I mean, I followed that as soon as you put that on the calendar for the discussion, I was looking into it, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember this being on ABC News and Fox News and all that stuff like that.
Man, it's crazy because I had no real prior knowledge of this, and was not even, it didn't even cross my radar in the time that it was happening. But I think that is effectively just because I'm kind of out of the loop in terms of just, cases that are currently taking place. For the most part, I'm not like actively looking into these cases until, honestly, they typically just have to organically cross my path. That's typically how I come across some of this. But again, I had no expectation of what I was going to find. What's up, Nick?
If you don't mind me making this statement, I think maybe you'll agree with this. You know what I thought was even weird with this? Because again, like almost like you, I didn't hear about it until like somebody, I think a fan or a listener, maybe somebody on the show mentioned it. And I was like, what the hell? Like I just started looking at some of it. And I was like, why is it that like Gilgo Beach, well, in my opinion, Gilgo Beach and even the Idaho 4, I think are deeply occulted, but it's not blatant. Yeah. And that shit, those topics were like huge. And like, even like, basically what I want to get at, I was just like, yo, why does this case that I think is blatant occultism, you even have people involved in the case saying they think it's there, and nobody's fucking talking about it.
Yeah.
I was just like you have these other crimes that I think are blatantly occult as well, but nobody's bringing up the occultism. And then the one crime that I think is, telling you there's occult shit in it, nobody's covering that. It's like, what the, like, I don't know. It's like, how did I not even hear about this?
Did y'all hear about the connection with the Norse paganism? Was y'all talking about that?
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah. We'll get into the Odinite Vinlander group that was a part. Dude, it's crazy, and I'm telling you, it's something I had no understanding, and that I was going to sort of like reveal this strange connection to this neo-pagan organization that had infiltrated the prison system in Indiana to such an extent to where you had federal investigators who were compromised. I mean, not only was the prosecution, I think Prosecutor McClellan, very clearly compromised. I think he himself is the reason that investigator Todd Click was brutally shamed and sort of his reputation damaged and his career was entirely destroyed. But we'll get into that. I just briefly, I wanted to finish kind of setting up what I viewed as why Richard Allen was sort of placed on the path of the patsy deliberately in my mind. And it sort of seemed like I feel as if he really sort of kind of, I think he was basically showing his morality in the way that he actually went and like 3 days after. It's very interesting because, as I mentioned, the misfiled tip, right, and the clerk that allegedly found this, the volunteer file clerk, but Richard Allen, he decided to self-report 3 days after the murders took place, to being on the trails on the day of the murders, and he reported seeing Williams and Liberty German. And this is all after his wife had just told him, like, he had gone home that day, had told her, yeah, I went to, I think he said he went fishing. He fished off the bridge at one point, Mona High Bridge Trail. And so he goes home. And then I think it was 3 days later, his wife tells him, like, hey, the authorities, the police are asking for anybody who had gone to that area to provide any tips or any, obvious witness accounts of what they obviously saw that day. And so that's when Richard Allen decides that he's going to self-report and go in 3 days after the murder. And so it wasn't until October 26, 2022, right? So that's September 2022 is allegedly 5 years after the original murders happened in 2017. This tip is found by this volunteer file clerk, and she then tells the investigators about this Richard Allen individual. Who, how on earth are your files that unorganized to where a very important and key tip that would obviously push you toward the direction of the priority perpetrator would have been lost in the shuffle? Just that alone, I mean, it's possible. I'm not saying they're the most organized, but it does seem a little bit hard to believe on its face. But at the same time, it was October when Richard Allen was taken into custody, right? 2022. And he appears in court October 28th. And I believe it was Indiana State Police that announced the last day of October that Allen had been charged with 2 counts of murder in the case, and he pled not guilty. But this all seemed to be sort of whenever the judge, Francis Goal, yeah, man, there's another picture of Richard Allen, and it's after he had been going through trial, and it looks like he's a shell of a human being. Like, he legitimately, it's really sad to see the sort of physical consequences of just going through something like this. If you potentially were an innocent person, I think it's at the very least, it's worth considering that might be the case. And who knows what he has endured while he's been in custody, because there's a lot more concerning his potential abuse. But still, there was Francis Gold, the judge. She issued in November of 2022 to unseal the probable cause affidavit that led to the arrest of Richard Allen. And so this is when the video footage recovered from the phone showed one of the victims mentioning gun as a man wearing a dark jacket and jeans approached them and ordered them to go down the hill. And this is when the investigators claim it's Richard Allen in 2022 November. So they also happen to find, and this is worth mentioning at least, is that there's a 40 caliber unspent round that was found less than 2 feet from one victim's body, but between the 2 victims. Now, to me, I think very convenient, potentially planted evidence, right? That's just the first thing that comes to my mind, because how very sloppy if you're committing a ritualized murder with staged bodies to legitimately leave an unspent round from the murder weapon between the bodies. That doesn't make any sense at all. That sounds like you just took a bullet and threw it between the bodies and said, there's the evidence. Honestly, at that point, who knows? But it was then determined that the round came from a gun owned by Richard.
Professionals.
Yeah, but like, it's just crazy to me. But a witness claims she saw a man walking away from the bridge wearing a blue-colored jacket and blue jeans and was muddy and bloody. All right. And another witness in a tip mentioned that a car was parked oddly and appeared to be parked in a way as if to hide its license plate. Investigators said the description of the vehicle matched a vehicle that Allen owned in 2017. Then you have a report coming out of Riley shortly after his arrest that Richard Allen told authorities that he was at his mother's house in Peru while his wife was working Allen estimated that he left the house around 11:15, arrived at the Monon High Bridge Trail around an hour later. He then says he saw 3 girls passing by on the trail before stating that he did not see anybody else after this. So he went on his phone to watch the stocks ticker while walking on the trail before deciding he could not find his black 2016 Ford Focus. This was a strange part of the story on the trail property. After he finds his vehicle, drives back to his mother's home, Allen said he continued to watch the stocks. He then says he told his wife that he was on the trail the day the girls went missing. His wife mentioned that the police were looking to talk to people who may have information. So he said he went to the sheriff's office and spoke with the Department of Natural Resources officer days after the 2 girls were killed. So all that fundamentally plays in and fits perfectly into the alleged, at the very least, timeline. And so this is when in October of 2023, Judge Gull removes the defense attorneys, and she cites gross negligence due to crime scene photos being leaked from their office. The attorney's removal was appealed to the Indiana Supreme Court, in which the justices of the Indiana Supreme Court reinstated the defense attorneys to the case. That in itself was as if it looked like a potential, disruption of justice in a way, where you're at the very least you're attempting to remove defense attorneys from a case because you're citing the fact that they have revealed damning crime scene photographs. Now, I understand that there's some sort of process in terms of the evidence you're allowed to make public, but at the same time, that seems like gross negligence. I don't know about that. It's very interesting that most of this was being held secret, especially when the families themselves were demanding that much of the evidence was made public. And so, as recent as October 2024 was when the trial began, right? And prosecutors, they state both the girls had their throats cut, Williams was found fully clothed, whereas German was discovered nude. An unspent .40 caliber bullet from Allen's gun found between the bodies. Prosecutors said that Allen had admitted to the murders more than 60 times while incarcerated, confessing to his wife, his mother, family members, the prison warden, the psychologist who treated him in prison, other prison employees, and other inmates. The confessions were made in person, over the phone, and in writing. Prosecutors told the jury that Allen was the bridge guy after showing them a digitally enhanced 43-second version of the cell phone video recorded by German. A state police master trooper who had listened to more than 700 of Allen's prison phone calls testified that the voice of the bridge guy is the voice of Richard Allen. And the jury, which had been sequestered during the trial, began deliberations on November 7th. Allen was convicted November 11th, 2024 on all counts, and his sentencing date was set for December 20th, and he was officially sentenced to 130 years. And when you look at the individual sentencing hearing, it was very interesting because obviously I think the judge was very much Francis Gull. Oh, so it was playing. Hold on, I have an ad playing on my shit. What is happening? Oh, it's the wrong one. Sorry, guys. Boom. All right, there we go. So what I found here was that it looks like, 130 years in prison. But Francis Gull, the judge, she says that this is what she says when she convicts him. Allen, he's 52 years old, convicted on November 11th. And the special judge in the case, Francis Gull, sentenced Allen on 2 of the 4 murder counts and imposed the maximum of 65 years for each count to be served consecutively. The sentencing hearing, which included victim impact statements from 6 relatives of the teens, lasted less than 2 hours. And after it concluded, one of Allen's defense attorneys said they plan to appeal and seek a new trial. He looked entirely, I saw the video of him outside the courthouse whenever he was approached by the media. He looked like he was an attorney who was kind of like, it looked as if he had witnessed a glimpse into the sort of machinations of this sort of the deliberate facilitation of a cover up, and how you are kind of left on the outside in terms of pursuing any real justice, bringing forward any actual corroborated exculpatory evidence, honestly. And so she made some crazy statements surrounding Richard Allen's character in the sentencing hearing, and Richard Allen himself basically didn't say a word while he was being sentenced. And to me personally, I think there's a reason for that. I think he's been entirely, personally destroyed probably throughout the process. But especially if you're considered to have murdered two young girls, right, who are 13 years old. I mean, that in itself is I just couldn't even imagine if you're an innocent man, you're being accused and then convicted and sentenced for a crime you didn't commit that had moral implications to that level. But this is where the story gets very interesting, because I feel like we, at the very least, we set it up the way that it should be in terms of understanding, the evidence that was put forward. And in my mind, as far as just the limited sort of controlled flow of what was being, basically publicized and made available to the public. And so you have FBI agents who began to speak out, claiming that bodies were staged at the crime scene, right? And this all begins because, and this apparently is due to so there's misinterpretations, and as far as these Richard Allen and his defense attorneys, they basically claim that these federal investigators working the case had made these. Now, you have the Delphi memorandum that's very important in terms of this case as well. But when you have federal investigators who are making these claims public, I think that's more important than anything. And basically, you have FBI agent who believes that clothing was taken and bodies were staged in the Delphi murders. And he essentially says this is Agent Nicole Robertson believed a possible suspect in 13-year-old Abby Williams and 14-year-old Libby German's deaths lived at a property near where their bodies were found. And that's why I brought up the name of Ronald Logan, right? Who's that elderly man who allegedly was 77 years old. And that is when it was on his property that the ritual murder site was found. So court documents detail a search warrant request made from March 17th, 2017. The request is to search the home of Ronald Logan, which is only 1,400 feet from where the bodies were found. Now, the search warrant, the agent Nicole Robertson, notes that pieces of the clothing from one of the victims were missing and that it appeared the girls' bodies were moved and staged. There were no visible signs of a struggle or fight. The agent suspected a souvenir had been taken by the killer and that it was common for perpetrators to memorialize the crime scene with pictures. And then Agent Nicole Robertson also said investigators recovered fibers and unidentified hairs at the crime scene. She noted that 77-year-old Logan appeared to be in good enough physical condition, and his voice was not inconsistent with that of the voice captured on German's phone. Now, I wouldn't say that he was the bridge guy, because again, I will get into who I legitimately do believe is the perpetrator, who was represented as the bridge guy. And I don't think that it was Ronald Logan. I think that he was potentially involved with the local chapter of the cult organization, and maybe this is why they had access to his property to potentially arrange a ritualistic murder site such as this. That would make more sense to me, that he was potentially just an involved member and was allowing this to almost take place. And maybe he was, even involved on the ground level and was legitimately taking part in the ritualistic sacrifice with the other members. But I don't think he himself at 77 years old was the bridge guy, right? Who was actually procuring the girls and physically taking them to their ritualistic death site, so the FBI agent then notes that in an interview with Logan's relative, The relative tells the agent that Logan called them the morning of February 14th. So this is the day after. And also consider this. February 14th is an occult holiday. It is a legitimate, this came up in Son of Sam. The reason that they staged one of the ritualistic murders, I think it was Stacey Moss. I can't remember who it was now, but it was on Valentine's Day. And it was, it entirely was intended to be a symbolic reference, you know. And I think that when you understand like the at least what individuals have claimed to be the case in terms of the layered agenda of an occult ritual sacrifice, yeah, I definitely believe that the subconscious nature of individuals even participating just at a psychological level, whether unbeknownst to themselves, I think that there's potentially in the minds of the occult initiate, there's a legitimate path to harnessing that energy that you are sort of, which I find to be very interesting at the least. So anyway, still they note that that clearly, you know, this had happened the 14th or the 13th, and then the bodies are discovered on the 14th. But it's interesting as far as the fact that this Richard Logan, or what's his name again? I keep forgetting his name. Ronald Logan. Richard Allen, sorry. But yeah, Ronald Logan. Okay, so he basically gives this call and to a relative the day after the murders happened and the day the bodies are found. And he asked them to lie about where he had been the previous afternoon. This is prior to the bodies actually being discovered. And Logan allegedly asked the relative to say they drove to a Lafayette aquarium store at a time that matched when Williams and German went missing around 2 p.m. So a receipt was actually found in Logan's home and showed a checkout time of 5:21 p.m. All right. And the FBI agent noted the store was approximately 30 minutes from Logan's home. So very much still fits within the time frame in terms of the actual crime taking place and the abductions of the girls at the very least. So the agent said Logan's statements about his whereabouts were found to be factually false and intentionally designed to deceive law enforcement officers. The FBI agent also said the relative believed the original image of the suspect looked like Logan. So that is worth, I think, pointing out that the proximity of where Libby and Abby's bodies were located, really on the property. I have to take this ad off. Sorry, guys. It keeps popping up. I have an article pulled up about Anthony shots, and this stupid ad keeps playing over and over again. And the only reason I have that pulled up is because I think it is actually important to reference. But yeah, so now we sort of make our way into the more interesting aspect of this case, because you had a woman who had a relationship with this Ronald Logan years earlier, and she tells law enforcement at that time that Logan had been physically abusive, threatened that he could kill her and no one would find her body, that Logan carried a gun with him everywhere he went in a fanny pack. She told the agent that when she first saw the image of the suspect, she thought it was Ronald Logan. Another woman who had been in a relationship with Logan told law enforcement that when she heard the bodies were found near Logan's home, she believed he was involved. The FBI agent noted that a search of a tip database about a month after the murders had 15 tips connecting Logan to the murders. The FBI agent also claimed that text messages sent to and from Logan's phone the evening of February 13th, 2017, showed he was likely outside his home and in the proximity of where Libby and Abby's bodies were located. It was then noted Logan had been physically able to get up and down the hill from his home to the crime scene when he met with the officers on February 17th. Specifically, they believed, the agents, that Logan could be involved in the murders and were quoted saying, "I believe there is probable cause to believe that Ronald Logan has committed the crime of murder, and evidence of that could be found on Ronald Logan's property." This is when he dies in 2020, never officially being named as a suspect in the Delphi murders case. So that is the first person that crossed my radar that seemed to, at the very least, it seemed to, provide a little bit more credible evidence than that of Richard Allen's involvement on the day of the murders. And so then we have this Anthony Schatz individual who comes up in this strange connection on December 6th of 2021. And Indiana State Police, they basically asked for help from anyone who had contact with Anthony Schatz's account profile. And detectives said the account with the username Anthony Schatz was used on Snapchat and Instagram, among other social media platforms, in 2016 and 2017. Now, I think it's important to mention that only minutes before Libby captured that video of the bridge guy, she had posted a picture of her best friend on Snapchat as they walked along the Monon High Bridge. So that to me was, I thought instantly, this could be a matter of they were essentially lured into their position, into place, right, by this, what I viewed to be honestly a window into how children could be procured in a network in modern day, right? Utilizing these social media platforms like a Snapchat to obviously attempt to procure children for a network of abuse, or even for a potential ritualistic initiatory sacrifice, things of that nature, right? And I think that this is a window into how you could potentially go about doing so in the digital age, right? Because so many of the examples that I've witnessed over my research, over the course of my research into other cases in the past, have kind of shown a similar path and a similar playbook, but didn't quite, prove to, right, directly kind of link to this sort of digital procurement, in this sort of modern age. And I think that this could be a way that many of these strange individuals, like if you look at a picture of Keegan Klein, who is Anthony Schatz, it's very obvious this guy was legitimately guilty of at the very least engaging with child pornography, right? And I think he was obviously a pedophile. But so if you're already this kind of sinister individual who has these sadistic sexual proclivities, then you're operating in an environment where you're seeking out other sadistic sociopaths, right, with similar proclivities, which you will then pursue as a group. And I think that at the very least, certain individuals play various roles within that framework. And Keegan Klein could very well just have been a child procurer for a larger network, and for his own benefit, because he's clearly, not only can you, in terms of the enterprise, financially profit off of something like that, you can also gain, free and open access in certain ways, and easier access to, and more available avenues to those very, unfortunate situations of vulnerable children, right? And so state police say the person behind the account used a male model, right? Photos of a male model, and portrayed himself as being extremely wealthy and owning numerous sports cars. They say the person used the profile to communicate with underage girls, to solicit nude images, and want to know if anyone has requests to get their address or try to meet with him. They put out another statement. They say they've identified the male model that was used in the photos on the account, and that the man is not a person of interest in the Delphi case. He legitimately looks like some sort of like Bieber, Justin Bieber type male model, like the actual pictures that were being used by Keegan Klein on the Anthony Schatz profile. And it is a way that you could very obviously appeal to the younger generation, or just young girls who don't know any better and are obviously attracted to that lifestyle. It would be one way you could very easily confuse them and disorient them and lure them into a position where they would become obviously, they would just be potentially at the Monon High Bridge Trail waiting for Keegan Klein to pick them up, right? Or Brad Holder, for example, who I believe was potentially involved. So I think there's direct evidence of that. But at the same time, you have a connection to the Delphi murders, to the Anthony Schatz fake social media profile, which started with another incident. This incident was reported to police just days after the bodies were found. And so they obviously they questioned Keegan Klein, and it was like August 2020, I think, is when this happened, and so yeah, it was in Peru, and the Indians just closed that. Oh my God, that
That's
was
how it
annoying.
pops up. It also messes up your audio. I noticed that.
Dude, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. Okay.
But anyway, yeah, I should know that because I think that happened to me once before when I pulled that before. It's a local, like some local news from Indiana, and but anyway, I need to get an ad blocker. So yeah, it is it's very interesting that obviously this profile, the Snapchat profile, was in conversation, with actually engaging with Libby and Abby just before their bodies were discovered. So Klein was not charged. This is supposedly unrelated in terms of the case that he was then interrogated in 2020 based off of. But he'd been held in the Miami County Jail for over a year and a half on 30 charges of child pornography and exploitation. So he obviously did have a serious criminal history. And Klein admitted in court records to creating the Anthony Shots profile to communicate with underage girls and receive sexually explicit images. So the transcript of this video interview that Klein gave when he was arrested is like 194 pages. And essentially, police questioned Klein in that interview about another school-aged girl that gave her address to Anthony Shots just days after the Delphi murders. And Klein knew the girl's family from Galveston, Indiana. So the police investigator told Klein, she comes home from school, sees this guy with a ski mask looking in her bedroom window directly after giving this address to Anthony Shots. That's the incident that started everything else last time, he says. That's how everything started last time, was that incident. So that's what they tell, the police investigator tell Keegan Klein. Keegan Klein responds saying that's crazy, and police tell Klein that he searched online for information about the family on February 19th, the day before the incident. So I did think that was important because he's sitting there and he's lying to the authorities while he's being interrogated on this incident, and then they legitimately kind of put him into position as far as kind of like lured him into place as well, and in tricking him to claim as if that wasn't the case, right? In terms of being involved in actually engaging in conversation with this girl who's claims that a masked figure was discovered outside her bedroom, just after, like hours after or within a day that she had just obviously engaged with this Anthony Shots Snapchat profile. So now the person behind the Anthony Shots Snapchat profile was one of the last to communicate with Libby German before her death, right? And so the Anthony Shots profile told another person that he was supposed to meet up with Libby, quote, but she never showed up. So I think that at the very least, he was clearly involved in attempting to lure them to the Monon High Bridge Trail. I believe that was his role. And at the very least, he was clearly, attempting to, first of all, why would that account also be directly connected to an unrelated case where a young teenage girl is right engaging with this Anthony Shots profile, and then within hours there's a masked figure outside her bedroom. So to me, it feels as if potentially this is a path toward abducting children, right? And anyway, I do think it's one of the most interesting aspects of the case, because except for the occult connections, because I do think that this was at the very least a strategic way to kind of procure the children, right? And that in itself, I think, was important to the Vinlander group who were attempting to find victims. So as we I think the Delphi memorandum is the best example of providing the most crucial information first of all, the withholding of the exculpatory evidence, but also the exculpatory evidence that proves the occult connection to the neo-pagan organization. And so that is when you have, basically there's a memorandum that's submitted to the court by Richard Allen's attorneys. And this all happens in 2023. And he's then 50 years old, right? And he's maintained his innocence, throughout this entire process, as well as his attorneys claiming, right, that instead of Richard Allen, committing the killings in 2017, they claim the murders were carried out by a pagan cult hijacked by white nationalists. So members of this pagan Norse religion called Odinism, hijacked by white nationalists, ritualistically sacrificed Abigail Williams and Liberty German. His attorneys, they also claim that Allen's essentially possible Odinism signatures were left behind by the killers, and that the victims' bodies, they were essentially reinforcing what the federal investigators claimed, that the victims' bodies had been staged by trees with branches and sticks laid across their bodies in the shape of pagan symbols. And one of those pagan symbols was Ansuts, I believe, was one of the symbols, which it's pretty interesting what it actually and you have a federal essentially the behavioral analysis unit that the FBI's behavioral analysis unit, they claim that there were Nordic beliefs. They determined Nordic beliefs were tied to the perpetrators of this killing. But with the sort of deliberate withholding of exculpatory evidence, that all comes in the form of sort of, one, you have members of, there's overwhelming evidence as well throughout the course of this memorandum. It's fascinating stuff, but members of this pagan Norse religion called Odinism, hijacked by white nationalists, ritualistically sacrificed Abigail and Liberty. So very early on, those in charge of the Delphi murder investigation claim that they consulted with a Purdue professor now concerning what resembled possible Odinism signatures left behind. After the Purdue professor proclaimed, according to a state trooper named Jerry Holman, that it was not Odinism or any type of cult worshiping or any type of group that would have conducted the crime, the Odinism angle was essentially abandoned after this statement was made by this Purdue professor. So, as of September 7th, 2023, the leaders of the Delphi investigation team, they were claiming that they can't identify who this purported professor was, have provided no reports from this purported professor, and have further indicated that they may never be able to figure out who this professor is. So that to me shows that they were clearly trying to misdirect everyone from even pursuing this angle of the Odinism signatures of the crime scene. And therefore they tried to get some anonymous Purdue professor who was never, his name was never revealed to the investigators, that would be enough to essentially kind of misdirect the angle of the case itself and the investigators who were involved. So they themselves admitted that they have no idea who this professor was, and this is all based in large part upon this mystery professor, Purdue professor's opinion, that the Delphi investigative leadership claimed it essentially abandoned considering Odinite involvement in the murders. And so then we have years pass, right, from 2018 to 2022. And luckily for us, we have a few examples of at least two individuals, I believe potentially three, because Kevin Murphy, he's remained the most kind of silent after all of this. But law enforcement officers by the name of Kevin Murphy, Greg Ferenczi, and Todd Click, they pursued the truth, and legitimately seemed to have, actual integrity. And so they began to provide just extraordinary evidence in terms of establishing the names and the murderers who were likely involved as members of this Odinite cult. And it was, I think the Delphi investigative leadership, they made all of this, at least some of it was becoming public by February 2018. So you had this sort of the state of Indiana, I think it was in 2023, May, there's prosecutor Nick McClelland, right? He receives a letter from former Rushville Assistant Police Chief Todd Click, who's now been retired. And Click says Murphy and Ferenczi were three of the law enforcement officers who worked on the Delphi murder case, particularly focused on the Odinite angle as it intersected with suspects in Rushville, Indiana. Now, after going through Richard Allen's probable cause affidavit, Click becomes concerned that information contained in Richard Allen's affidavit pointing the finger at Richard Allen was far less compelling than the totality of the information that Detective Ferenczi, Murphy, and Click had accumulated during the Rushville portion of their investigation. So this is where it gets fascinating, because the information that these investigators provide, who were among the task force, that was its sole purpose when it was created, was to investigate and trace the Odinite connections to the crime scene itself. And so that in itself, like if you have federal investigators in a task force of 3 who are essentially given this priority, and then it's later on entirely covered up, and the individuals who are part of the task force, right, are kind of like, they endure these ultimate consequences. It begins to, at the very least, to provide some sort of smoking gun into a facilitation of a cover-up, and reinforce that notion. But so they gather some extraordinary evidence, and a letter was then provided to the prosecutor, obviously. And so this exculpatory information was entirely withheld from the jury, right, on behalf of the prosecution. And so McClelland, he was essentially kind of, I think this was all in order to obviously sit on this exculpatory evidence, hoping that the defense team would refocus its efforts on another angle of the investigation. But the exculpatory evidence claims that, obviously the contents of what was found in this memorandum were just too damning, right? In terms of the names of the actual perpetrators, you have actual witnesses, like, who are spouses, right, of the individuals named, who are coming out with, actual testimony to these, at least in their conversation with investigators, they're telling these members of the task force, right, in extraordinary detail, what had taken place the night of the murders, and also the sort of falling out that ensued afterward in terms of the social interactions of the members of the group itself. So they essentially, this is when you have the behavioral analysis unit of the FBI. They determine through a summary of Click's investigation that essentially they determined that the individuals responsible for the homicides were involved in Nordic beliefs. And so when you have the BAU of the FBI actually admitting this fact, I think that also provides another sort of smoking gun. But this was all sort of to the defense, as far as no member of the Unified Command in charge of the investigation revealed any of this information to the defense team during any of the depositions that took place. So that even included Trooper Holman, who I believe was compromised and a part of the cover-up. He tells the defense that he didn't remember if the FBI's BAU unit determined one way or the other whether those with Nordic beliefs had been involved in the murders. But it starts to reveal itself through the course of kind of like digging down into the individual investigators who were part of this case. You can very obviously see, almost at face value after a certain point of reading through the affidavits and the memorandums and the court documents, that who is acting in good faith and who is very clearly attempting to pursue this cover up. And so, yeah, anyway, I think that is basically, I just wanted to, at the very least, kind of make that statement, because as far as the withholding of the exculpatory evidence, I think it was deliberate. I think if you look into it at a deeper level, and I covered it in more detail on my own personal episode regarding this, that it becomes very obvious that you have so much of the Odinist evidence, the evidence that the prosecution turned over to the defense, the timing of it all being turned over to the defense, It was all scattered throughout multiple hard drives on many different flash drives. They made it as difficult as possible to put any of this together, right? And especially for the defense. And so that again seems as if it's deliberate. But here's where the Odinist ties to the crime scene begin to really reveal themselves, and it's through the prosecution learning in early August that the defense had figured out these strong Odinist ties to the crimes, despite these obvious attempts to by the prosecution, right, to essentially misdirect and withhold the evidence from the defense. So investigators themselves provided the defense with a lot of this information, and that upset the prosecution. It upset the judge, who was clearly in bed with the prosecution. It's very strange. Sorry, I need a little bit of coffee.
Tired. Going.
So this is when you kind of have basically you have Todd Click. He's desperate. He wants to allay his fears that an innocent man was sitting in Westville in regards to Richard Allen. And so he attends a meeting with the trooper Holman, right? And he hopes that he will learn that evidence did in fact exist linking Richard Allen directly to the murders. But he claims in his own affidavit that his hopes were dashed, right? And upon directing the letter to Prosecutor McClelland, he heard nothing from the prosecutor's office or any other members of Unified Command until he received phone calls on August 23rd and August 25th of 2023, which involved discussions regarding scheduling. During the phone calls, it was requested that he meet with Trooper Holman during the week of September 4th. He was informed that law enforcement officials intended to sit down with him and discuss with him the reason why Richard Allen was responsible for these crimes. He was told that Jerry Holman wanted to put his mind at ease. However, during the meeting with Detective Holman and a second detective whose name he was unfamiliar with, there was no discussion or offerings as to why they believed Richard Allen was guilty of the charged crimes. He believes the interview was an attempt by them, the detectives, the troopers, to clean up their loose ends, knowing that they had given very little, if any, attention to the investigative efforts by himself, Detective Ferenczi, or Detective Murphy, who were all members of the task force who were investigating the Odinism signatures to the crime scene. So, not only did you have Carroll County Sheriff Tony Leggett failed to include all this Odinite information in his October 2022 affidavit for search warrant, not only did Prosecutor McClelland and the Unified Command withhold exculpatory evidence, Leggett also concealed damaging witness statements that devastate Leggett's timeline, a timeline which was needed to be true in order to place Richard Allen at the trail when Abby and Libby were abducted. So this is how they further control and, I think, manufacture their own version of this sort of timeline that fits this mainstream, made for public perception version of the Delphi murders. So Richard Allen, he clearly has zero connections to as far as to any of the pagan cult organizations, and no forensic evidence or DNA, electronic evidence links Richard Allen to the girls, to the crime scene. It was only the .40 caliber round that was discovered between the bodies. And he is even mentioned in the affidavit. It says flat out by the investigators, he is a completely innocent man. Most of the evidence backing these assertions was found scattered over no less than 10 hard drives, several flash drives provided by the prosecution, meaning that the defense they weren't wildly making accusations, but rather primarily relaying facts and information that is backed up by the prosecutor's own discovery. So, not coincidentally, Odinist members of the same pagan cult were employed at the corrections officers for the Indiana Department of Corrections at Westville Correctional Facility.
I always thought that was the weirdest shit with this whole thing too. Right,
and so that is where at the Westville Correctional Facility, this maximum security unit, this reformatory that Richard Allen was being threatened, intimidated, and mentally abused is what the claims are. And so Unified Command, they're essentially the leadership who were in command over the Delphi murder investigation. And Tony Leggett, who I mentioned a moment ago, Carroll County Sheriff and member of the Unified Command when the investigation began. So the Unified Command consisted of law enforcement from a variety of entities. So you have state, local, federal, and they're overseers of the entire investigation operation. This is why it's so important to have mentioned the fact that the Unified Command was so directly involved with withholding exculpatory evidence from the defense, and the jury, of course, because that was never going to even be made available to the jury, right? And that's it's so interesting to see how this all plays out and how the judge inevitably rules against allowing any of the Odinists investigative evidence to be put forward and made public in the trial, right? So Odinism, I guess we should just briefly mention what it is. The pagan religion, referenced throughout all of these court documents, and its followers they refer to as Odinites. Odinists, they are very usually obsessed with Viking Nordic culture, often is the case, and so there's a lot of different evidence that supports at the crime scene that these Odinites were legitimately leaving behind obvious signatures and symbols in the form of these ancient runes. So the runes.
One thing I want to add, though, real quick, also, Austin, if there's any legitimacy to all this stuff, from my experience too, I've mentioned on the show, I did 2 years in federal prison. There was about a bunch of Odinists in there. So, I mean, you could even be getting intimidated by the gang that's in the prison.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You just want to throw that in there. I mean, there was a fuck ton of them in there. I mean, they were all cool guys. They loved their drugs and they just hung out and kind of pretty much didn't bother anybody, but there was enough of them.
Yeah, I've had a lot of pushback on by some strange neo-pagans that I didn't realize how much they legitimately are actively practicing their belief system, and so they've been pushing back on just in terms of the way that I sort of demonized the philosophy behind Odinism and throughout the course of this case. It's hard not to if you're talking about the actual criminals involved who are practicing and exercising the blood ritual sacrifice. That is the reason. I'm not saying all Odinists are committing blood ritual sacrifice, obviously, but unfortunately, I do think that there's far more neo-pagan belief systems that exist in these various groups that are just under-acknowledged. Like I was very underaware of the idea that there were many of these Nordic belief systems that exist at this moment. I'm just unaffiliated, right? And so like this was all new to me in certain ways, right? And so that was another aspect of this that I had never been introduced to Odinism or the Odinite, philosophy or ideology until this case. So it's hard not to have some sort of like, just in terms of interpreting the belief system and the potential like avenue of what you pursue while you're a believer in this, in a group such as this, it definitely has at the very least, it reflects badly upon any others who are affiliated. And so I understand why you would push back if you're a neo-pagan or, an Odinite, and in no way are you violent or committing some sort of ritual sacrifice. Then, hey, this doesn't have anything to do with you, right? Like, I think that's what you need to, people should at the very least kind of, I don't know, interpret it in that way instead of as if I'm attempting to blanket statement, condemn an entire belief system. That's not what I'm doing. I just think
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, it's just not the Odinism or just one religion that practices blood sacrifices. You will find that in all religions, even in Christianity, Catholics. 100%. The thing is that the people who are, I'm going to say fanatics in their religion sticks to what their religious books say. And then you have people who don't do the blood sacrifices, put the blood on the doors, or sacrificing animals and stuff like
Right.
that. That is part of their religion. A lot of people don't follow that. You know what I'm saying?
100%.
So, you know, putting it all on just one religion is, you know, kind of, I'm just going to say, you know, kind of wrong, because when you pick up that Holy Bible, every time you go to church on Sunday, they skip over the blood sacrifices that they're supposed to do.
I know, right? It's an
So,
oversimplification, I think, to obviously put it in any sort of blanket statement reference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you. And 100% you're right too, man. Like growing up, I grew up as a Southern Baptist, right? Like my grandpa was like the deacon of the Baptist church, and so I was kind of drenched in this sort of what Christian Zionism, really, in many ways, unfortunately, it at least the interpretation of the individuals who were surrounding me, you know, I feel like they had been very much influenced in unfortunately in the wrong direction, but that's just my personal opinion. But I will say that, yeah, what's a communion? You know, I mean, you're symbolically engaging in a ritual sacrifice in a way, or a blood ritual, right? You're drinking the blood of Christ is allegedly what you're doing, right?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I mean, that's what it is. And consuming his flesh as well. So it's even cannibalistic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, it's so funny that you say that, because I'm going to bring this up. Everybody knows about what manna is in the Bible. When you go to the Greek, the Strong's Concordance, and you look up what manna is, it literally means man. Like, no joke. I'll pull it up in a second. You look up at the Strong's Concordance and you look up what it means. Manna means man. And I'll bring it up just a moment. But it's crazy that it said that, because a lot of people will say, well, it's a bread-like substance. Well, bread was all kinds of food back then. That was their word for food. We use food today. They use the word bread or fish.
Right.
So a lot of people don't realize that. And that's why me personally, I like to go to the origins of the word and understand what exactly the word is meaning, because in Hebrew, I'm telling you, it's so crazy. Going from Aramaic to Hebrew to the Greek translations, manna means man.
Right. Man, that is honestly, I think the etymology of people don't know. Like, I think that casting spells, what does that really mean? You know, it's like I feel like there's a kind of this supernatural, unacknowledged reality to just, I think people don't realize how much power you could potentially possess. And I'm not meaning it in the form of, I just think frequency, EMF, right? I honestly, it's like legitimately, we are electrical beings in certain ways, right? So you can harness these aspects, and if you are aware enough and you understand the sophisticated nature of how much has been accomplished over generations, there's a reason why you can legitimately control the human mind utilizing, you know, these electromagnetic frequencies and various things of that nature. But yeah, the etymology of these words, I entirely believe that you know, nothing happens by accident, you know, so typically it's I think utilized in the fashion to where, you know, there are layered meanings to what is being. This is why I mentioned Delphi being the strategic location where this ritual would take place, and the same with the Son of Sam case and the ultimate evil, and the idea of the sort of subconscious participation. You know, I think that that's so crazy that, and I mentioned it once before, because basically I have like my thoughts on this sort of intersection of culture creation, social engineering, covert intelligence operations, and esoteric occult ideologies, right? Where it's like essentially they're subconsciously initiating people using various methods of deception. And I think that is a part of the etymology that you mentioned, right? Of the manna. I do think that there are layered meanings to so much, and so much of that is, you know, just, if you have yet to be introduced to this frame of thought, right, this at least avenue of thought, then yeah, I think you are sort of running a risk of vulnerability at the very least. And that's another reason why I'm so concerned with sort of the art of war and the concept of knowing your enemy. Because I think if you do not understand the threats that are being posed and that you legitimately face, then how are you to manufacture any sort of legitimate, defense mechanism that would hopefully, run counter to a lot of this propaganda and misinformation being levied against us, or worse than that, there's a supernatural outcome here, and they're strategically pursuing it, and maybe a subconscious participation in an occult ritual, whether that's your interpretation of what took place or not, is crucial. I'm not certain of that, but I find it very interesting at the least. But yeah, so to say that Odinism, right? The as far as the runes that were discovered, it's strange, the ancient runes that they were utilizing for the symbols of the crime scene, because first the runes they're formed with sticks fashioned with tree branches, painted using the blood of Liberty German. Sticks and tree branches were deliberately, carefully, and proficiently placed on each girl in a certain arrangement, mimicking certain runes. So at least one of the branches appeared to have its end cut off cleanly by some type of tool, like potentially an electric saw. And this provided sort of proof of a preconceived plan. So then you additionally have this sort of the blood of Liberty German being used to paint a mark on a tree with a rune that looks similar to the letter F. So when you look up this symbol, the rune it's identifiable as one referred to as Ansuts, I believe is the way that you pronounce it, and it's a calling card, basically. But it's very strange, Ansuts. When you look up this, it's sort of like from the Germanic 3rd to the 13th centuries. Some of these alphabetical runes that are utilized, and many of them do resemble the letter F. But Ansuts was the one that seemed to look identical to that of the symbol found on the tree in the blood of one of the girls in the Delphi case. And allegedly, this stands for Odin as well. So Ansut stands for Odin as well, and so that in itself, I mean, law enforcement failed to actively pursue any of those obvious links between the crime scene and Odinism, but beyond the fact that you have the tree branches sort of staged and arranged, mimicking these runes, and the electric saw, right? You have law enforcement in charge of the investigation. They just entirely decide that this is not at all of any concern, obviously, and so they decide that essentially Odinism, despite an obscene amount of evidence linking this to the crime scene, and even in spite of powerful evidence linking specific Odinists in and around Indiana to the murders, they decide that this is nothing to pursue going forward. And so anyway, at this point, you have a particular Odinite named Brad Holder, and he's from Logansport. And he posts on social media images mimicking the very runes found at the crime scene. And a crime scene, which at that time, by the way, is unreleased and unknown to the general public, right? And so I had to look into who this Brad Holder was. And it turns out he is an Odinite whose son Logan had been dating Abby, right? And so that in itself was, okay, there's a direct connection here. He already knew this girl. She could have become a priority target very easily. And Brad Holder's social media posts seemed to taunt the very police that refused to fully investigate the Odinist ties to the crime scene, or he himself. And the defense believes that the court was, as far as the number of Easter eggs that were discovered after the murders. It's interesting because the defense was claiming that the court would be shocked, but again, they couldn't bring any of that forward, so it didn't amount to anything. And so Holder openly posts on his Facebook page that he was clearly involved in the murders, right? He in fact, there's Brad Holder it's very interesting because he's never even considered to be a suspect, right? And that's mind blowing to me, especially considering the fact that police reports written near the time of the murders revealed that Jerry Holman, one of the troopers, is he mentioned that Brad Holder was cleared as a suspect initially, like right away on March 16th, 2017, and so yeah, to me, I find that very interesting that they would instantly kind of clear him, right, without looking into any of these connections. And so they claim there were no leads required concerning Brad Holder, right? So then there was this sort of interesting moment that happened within the Unified Command, right? After Brad Holder is cleared, the girls hadn't even been dead for 30 days, and the Unified Command already cleared him as a suspect. And so already you have essentially you have the investigation barely even beginning, and this is taking place. So both women, they have tree limbs, all right, arranged all over their bodies. One of the women had her arm stretched out above her head, similar to the way that Libby's arm was stretched above her head, and that's in the context of essentially on April 12th, 2017. You have Joseph Ryan Winters, who's a trooper, and he receives a phone call from a man in Georgia named Ryan Boucher, who had discovered disturbing images on Brad Holder's social media account. So somehow he learns that Brad Holder's son, Logan, had dated Abby Williams, and Boucher, this individual who's giving the tip to the trooper Joseph Ryan Winters, he began reviewing Brad Holder's social media history on his own. So one of the images Boucher viewed on Brad Holder's social media account was an image of two women either dead or posed as if they were dead on the ground in what appeared to be a forest. And this is, of course, both women. They have tree limbs arranged on their bodies. One of them had her arm stretched out above her head, which is exactly what happened with Libby's arm, which was stretched above her head. And both women were clothed, and the stick and tree branch formations on these girls was different than the stick and tree branch formations on Abby and Libby. But other than that, it bore a very eerie similarity to the murder scene in Delphi. So this Ryan Boucher, who's giving this tip, hey, sorry, my dog. He essentially says that he claims that he contacts this basically he sees these disturbing images, right, and he discovers that Brad Holder seems to have an obsession with runes that he's posting on his social media account at the time. And so not only did you have all of these eerie similarities to the actual murder scene in Delphi that had just taken place and he had just been cleared as a witness, but you're now seeing that he's also posting images of these runes, which are then discovered at the crime scene but never made officially public until later on by investigators. So this, to me, I thought was very important and interesting, because he believes that these disturbing images were some sort of essentially, it was like he was proud of the event taking place, and he was clearly kind of in a way, just to not even have concern over the investigators discovering these obvious posts that you're making. That in itself shows that he felt as if he had legitimate protection already. And so this Boucher, this individual who's providing these interesting tips to the trooper, he decides that he would contact state police instantly after discovering all of this stuff. And so throughout their conversation, the trooper memorializes the interaction and places these images provided by Boucher into a Dropbox account, and he creates a report, right, discussing the findings. So this was given, this report, face-to-face to Jerry Holman of Unified Command, who I think has been in many ways facilitating that very cover-up. So in the report, Winters requested law enforcement to re-interview Brad Holder. The defense did not believe Unified Command ever followed up on Winters' request. Now, it also should be noted that the disturbing images found by Boucher in Georgia and placed in a Dropbox by Winters were never provided to the defense team. So in his recent deposition, as far as Winters himself said that he had attempted to locate the images but was unable. However, because of the potential importance of those images to Richard Allen's case, the defense team located Boucher and then traveled to Georgia to meet with him. So this is the only way that they could actually gain access to any of this information, which is fascinating to me. So these images are now in the possession of essentially, first of all, the images themselves weren't provided to the defense until it was just like the timing of it, right? It was so far after they should have had a significant time with this legitimate information and credible corroborative evidence and exculpatory evidence, but instead they were given it at a very late date in terms of the process itself. And so again, the important images that law enforcement clearly failed to hand over to the defense in a timely manner. So instead, the defense locates these images from the actual individual who provided the troopers with the images themselves. So that, I think, is important, right? Because the trooper himself, he talks to the witness, he gets the images, he puts them in a file, he makes a report, gives all this information to Unified Command, and they withhold it from the defense. That's the whole point that should be made, obviously. So that was, in my mind, very clearly obvious, cover up in more ways than one. So this suspect, Brad Holder, though, it's very interesting to me because the defense claims that the position of William's body echoes that of a painting titled "Odin Hanging from World Tree." Right. So the same, basically, there's this painting and evidence of an additional darker component to the Odinism aspects of the staging of the bodies and the human sacrifice and imagery found, involved. And so these lawyers are citing imagery online of a man hanging upside down from a tree who has been sliced in the neck with blood dripping to the ground. And this man's arms are posed similarly to Abby's at the crime scene. And the legs of the man are also posed similarly to Abby's at the crime scene. His left leg is straight. His right leg is bent at the knee. The only difference is that the man's right leg is placed over the left leg, while Abby's right leg was posed under her left leg. Who knows the symbolic nature of that? While disturbing, obviously, the image appears to be depicting a foundational myth in Norse mythology in their belief system, wherein Odin sacrificed himself on the branches of the world tree, stabbing himself and hanging upside down for 9 days to obtain the wisdom of the runes. Unified Command's failure to vigorously pursue the obvious links between the crime scene and Odinism is even more perplexing when you discover this Vinlander group, right? Which evidence known to law enforcement demonstrated a clear nexus between Brad Holder and at least 4 other suspects. And this is when I feel like I actually got a direct glimpse into the perpetrators who were involved and who legitimately did participate in the murders of Abby and Libby. And I legitimately do think, like, considering the amount of witnesses that came forward, the people who know them personally, and I'm telling you, I do think that Elvis Fields, Patrick Westfall, and Brad Holder were key perpetrators who legitimately were a part of the ritual sacrifice of Abby and Libby. But let's see. So they're from Rushville. And I think this is what provides this sort of interesting nexus between Delphi and the Rushville area, because there were multiple people involved in the Vinlander group, and they were from different areas. So you have Elvis Fields from Rushville, Patrick Westfall from Delphi. Patrick Westfall himself seems to have the most important connections that could have provided them with legitimate protection, police protection even, I think, is at the very least, it's implicated and alluded to in certain ways by Brad Holder. I think it was Brad Holder's wife at the time, named Amber Holder, who made these statements. And so it's coming from someone, obviously a spouse, but they separated after all of this took place. So in my mind, clearly there was this sort of inevitable fallout. But yes, so Patrick Westphal from Delphi, Johnny Messer from Rushville, and Rod Abrams from Rushville. And so Unified Command, they were aware that Elvis Fields confessed to his sister that he was involved in the murders, even providing to his sister intimate crime scene details of which only those present at the crime scene would have familiarity. So Elvis Fields told his sister Mary on February 14th, 2017, the day after the murders, that he was present at the killings and that he now had a brother and was now part of a gang. That's an initiation in my mind, as far as to legitimately tell your sister the day after the murders took place that you now had a brother and were now part of a gang, and that you were present at the killings. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I don't understand how any investigator would just deliberately ignore that. But in February of 2018, Elvis had been questioned by law enforcement, denied involvement in the murders. But after being dropped off at his trailer following the questioning, he turns around, walks back to the police car, and based on the police report, he asks the state trooper if his spit is found on one of the girls. But he could explain it away. Would he still be in trouble? Like, could you imagine if you're that investigator, you just got finished questioning him, and he comes back to the car after you're dropping him off at his residence, and he asks this question. And the state trooper that heard Elvis utter these words was named Kevin Murphy, who was a part of the 3-member task force, right, that I had mentioned earlier, whose sole purpose was to investigate the Odinism or Odinite crime, signatures of the crime scene. And Kevin Murphy was not part of Unified Command, but clearly I mentioned he's a member of that task force, but immediately relays Elvis's disturbing questions to the member of Unified Command by the name of Jay Harper. And so Elvis Fields, this alleged perpetrator, who was a member of a gang now, after this alleged sort of what seems to have been an initiatory ritualistic blood sacrifice, he admits to a different sister by the name of Joyce that he had in fact spit on one of the girls. Elvis told Joyce that he was on a trail and a bridge with 2 girls that were killed and that he was going away for a long time. Elvis's alibi for February 13th was also probably flawed. State troopers who weren't part of Unified Command determined that Elvis's roommate concocted a story concerning his whereabouts on February 13th, 2017. This roommate went by the name of Rod Abrams. And Rod Abrams told a story claiming that on that very day, February 13th, that essentially he and Elvis Fields and a man by the name of Ned Smith were visiting a sick friend in Muncie, Indiana. Now, unfortunately for Rod Abrams, this story conflicted with this story of Elvis Fields and what he had told law enforcement as to his whereabouts on February 13th. So these alibis are completely shady. They clearly, don't actually stand up in terms of what was relayed and as far as the alibis are concerned to the Unified Command. And the Unified Command knew that on February 1st, 2018, Elvis's sister passed a polygraph examination when asked if she were telling the truth about what Elvis had confessed to her. So you have that additional connection as well. Then you have the sort of ritual description and the fallout between Holder and Westphal, which made a lot of sense because after this goes public and they're attempting to, of course, kind of distance themselves from any of the questioning that's being, pursued at the time by any of the real investigators. Yeah, man, I'm telling you, I think there's far more symbolism involved than just even, Odin hanging from World Tree. I think it could have far more, just occult significance, but I'm not, again, I'm uninitiated, man. I don't have all the details of what they believe. And it is very interesting. I would like to have a deeper understanding of kind of the principles they allegedly pursue. But as far as what I discovered throughout this process and kind of researching, this case directly was that, obviously you had, law enforcement ignoring all these direct connections, except for the task force themselves, who was only a 3-person task force. And so basically information about this Odinite named Patrick Westfall, it essentially was, it's inexplicable in terms of the Odinist signatures and the evidence that was provided to law enforcement, how they could have ignored it. So Patrick Westfall, another Odinite, was living in Delphi, very close to the murder scene on February 13th. Evidence known to Unified Command included the fact that fellow Odinites, Patrick Westfall and Brad Holder, were close friends as late as January 21st, 2017. However, that friendship ended very abruptly in February, the very same month that the murders would take place. This schism in their friendship would essentially result from a fight that what was relayed to, I believe, Amber Holder, the wife, was that this fight had occurred between Holder and Westfall in February 2017, where Holder and Westfall were in the woods near a river conducting a ritual. One of them said or did something the other didn't agree with, and they no longer talked to each other. The river was near Patrick's house, and this is apparently coming from, it's coming from Amber Holder, as I mentioned, the ex-wife. But she says that an intoxicated Brad Holder shared this disturbing information with her when he's under the influence, and that Amber Holder then relays this disturbing information to law enforcement, who weren't part of Unified Command in 2019. And these officers then, of course, relayed this disturbing information to Unified Command. But Leggett, member of Unified Command, he conceals this information from Judge Diner. I believe he was the chief of police as well, Leggett. But in 2019, Unified Command learned that in a totally different conversation with his ex-wife, Brad Holder pointed the finger away from himself and directly at Patrick Westfall as being the person actually responsible for the murders of Abby and Libby. So, according to police reports, Brad Holder told his ex-wife, Amber Holder, that Patrick Westfall and his people killed Abigail Williams and Liberty German because one of their mothers was mixing with other people outside their mother's race. He also says Unified Command was aware that Brad Holder had told Amber that, quote, "I can only protect you so much if you keep asking questions." Brad Holder further tells his ex-wife, Amber, that Patrick Westfall had many people backing him up and that Westfall also had powerful friends, was the quote. So that made me think Patrick Westfall has more connections to essentially, potentially even leadership of the local authorities that were involved in facilitating the cover-up and misdirecting the investigators, because clearly, if the claim is he has powerful friends backing him up, and this is Brad Holder telling his wife this fact, and just after the fallout, after a ritual held in the woods near a body of water, a river, which is exactly the description of the crime scene of Abby and Libby, then yeah, it seems as if there were, clearly some sort of official protection concerning the authorities in the local area. But so, member of the Unified Command, Leggett, he knew of this information for more than 3 years, right, before he sought a search warrant for Richard Allen's house, yet never shared that information with Judge Diner. So Westfall provided a very weak alibi as to his whereabouts on the same date, February 13th. He told law enforcement that he was at home the afternoon of Monday, February 13th, 2017. And the defense is unaware of any search warrant that Leggett sought to enter Westfall's house, or whether Unified Command instructed law enforcement to knock on a single neighbor's door to verify Westfall's alibi. What's that?
I was just showing the collection of books that I think that people would enjoy. It's an 8-book box set, Myths and Legends, and it's from from Greek, Roman, Japanese, North Indian myths, Egyptians, Celtic, and Chinese myths. But what's important in here is what you're talking about. A lot of this stuff I learned from just reading this one right here. And it's a very simple book. Very, very, very simple book.
Norse myths.
I've
Who's
seen
the
those
author?
bookstores. I haven't seen them actually in the whole set, but I've seen like one of them.
Yeah, I got two different sets of these, but this one with the Norse mythology one was in this box set. But yeah, it's a lot in there, and they show the correlations and similarities between them all. So, and I'll actually be going over this on my YouTube because I have a series on my YouTube, what I've learned from reading this book. And what I like to do is I like to put little tabs on stuff that I found interesting in each book. And it's a lot. It's amazing about a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, because you can definitely find some of it right in here. And that's why it got me interested when Nick talked about you being on the show for this, because a lot of people don't really understand and realize that everything is through symbolism. Everything we do is through symbolism, right? Mm-hmm. And when we get that symbolism, it's only interpreted to the people who understand and know it.
Yeah. No, I think that you're absolutely right as far as that's concerned. It's because, like, essentially, the initiated, right, the vanguards of the secret knowledge are the only individuals who will acknowledge and be aware of that symbolic factor. But yeah, hey, do you guys mind if I go pee real quick, and then I'll be right back and we'll finish this thing off? And do you mind? Because I'm sorry, dude. I just want to
go ahead.
Okay, I appreciate it. And then we'll finish off the Vinlander gang and this sort of Rushfield to Delphi connection, which I think that in itself brings us to really just the minor details surrounding the obvious Odinite correctional officers who were abusing Richard Allen, and basically the FBI. I think the most important part of it is what happened to the task force who were solely tasked with the purpose of investigating the Odinite and Odinism signatures of the crime scene, because what happens to those three individuals, I think, provides the red flags and smoking gun necessary to kind of see through this event and pierce through that veil and understand that this was deliberately covered up in order to kind of deflect away from the unfortunate reality that there are members of and affiliated members of this neo-pagan organization or groups within the framework or umbrella in the Indiana area who have infiltrated the not only the prison system, but I mean, we're talking the local authorities are entirely compromised, and at the very least are pursuing the deflection and the cover up and right and so that I think is more important than anything, because you realize that this is the reason why Richard Allen has been given the maximum sentence and was never even kind of given a chance at pursuing justice in any real, legitimate way. And that was all. I mean, that tends to happen whenever it's a wider network, right? And that's what I view as like this kind of implicates a wider network who practices this sort of, unfortunate ritualistic blood sacrifice, but that legitimately draws in the unfortunate reality that it doesn't only involve animal sacrifice, right? Which and I've even had it explained. I think it was JJ that explained to me basically, because I was wondering why German shepherds in the context of the Son of Sam and the Process Church, like what is happening? Why are they sacrificing mass graves of German shepherd dogs at Untermeyer Park near the Devil's Cave, where they're holding these satanic blood rituals and given like security detail by the local motorcycle gang, right? Which is basically which I found interesting. You have members of like biker gangs who are coming out after they get a murder rap and telling detectives that we ran security for blood rituals in Untermeyer Park, and we would deflect away from anyone who was attempting to come in that wasn't initiated at the times that they were holding those ritual ceremonies. So fascinating, because to me what JJ said was basically that, and this is another their German shepherds are utilized as like they call them like corpse dogs, right? I think something like that, and there are like groups that will train these dogs into how they can essentially go into these areas after a natural disaster and search for corpses and identify corpses and things of that nature. They're like the highest level of breed of dogs that are capable of doing this. And there are strange people all over the country that apparently breed and train these dogs, and then for that sole purpose, and take them around to these interesting cases and murder cases, missing persons, stuff like that. But the whole point was is the intelligence of the German Shepherd, right? That it almost is it was the closest you could get essentially to sacrificing a human being, basically the closest you could get to the human intellect. And so that in itself I found to be very interesting, if that was actually the case. It wasn't just,
I would
go ahead.
I'm sorry, let me interject. I would argue that the Malinois is much more intelligent than the Shepherd. I'm not saying one or the other, but that's kind of why intelligence agencies have switched over to the Malinois. But for the German Shepherd, it is patriotic to the German country and German patriarchy. If you look at how the German breed came to be, it tells you everything. This is why the German Shepherd is used by Nazism, because it is the quintessential breed of the German. And even when they call the German Shepherd Alsace, I think, the name is escaping me. It is the name that was given to the adjacent country of Germany to evade being called German during World War II, because they didn't want the, I guess, the stigma.
Yeah, I get that.
I mean, look into the breed. If you look into actually the people who bred them, some of, these high-ranking people, especially in New York, they were German patriotic. So
interesting. Okay, that makes a lot of sense too. Yeah, definitely. And that would make a lot of sense why there's so much Nazism symbolic, as far as like symbolically layered throughout many of the cult organizations, like the process, right? I mean, they had like a broken skull open with the blood draining out, was just like dark shadows marching in lockstep, goose stepping, like with essentially a swastika. Yeah, it was like entirely, Nazi symbolism, but yeah, it's very strange. But yeah, I should go take a piss. I'll be right back.
Yeah. Alsatians, that's what they were called. Sorry.
My dog's behind. I'll be right back.
Can I throw in my symbolism of Delphi? Just
yes, I know you had a bunch of stuff.
I've been like chomping at the bit, but
go for it.
I didn't want to interrupt. Okay, so if we look at the two victims, Liberty Rose Lynn, German is her name. We notice that it's 2 BBs for Libby, and then we have Abigail Joyce Williams, again 2 BBs, right? So we have the letter B being kind of reinforced and used again and again. When we look at the victims themselves...
Real quick, I just did want to... You said the girl's name is Liberty, right?
Liberty. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that actually matches in Jewish gematria, ritual sacrifice.
That's interesting.
Sorry, I just...
No, please interject. So then, of course, her last name's German, right? Liberty, German. Okay, and so she was the oldest one of the 2. She's 14. She was the one that was found without clothes. And so that reminded me of like Eve in the garden, still in the garden, still in what have you. But of course, that's probably not, Odinistic. And then you have the youngest one who's 13, and she was clothed. And she was the one that looked like the hanged man, right? One of the things that I kind of wanted to emphasize, and I'll, briefly take you through that, is the numbers 4 and 3 are found over and over and over. And I'll show you how here in a little bit. But with into the tree, almost reminding you of the left-hand path or separation of self and so forth. And you have the Norse mythology of the tree, Yargersfell, it's an ash tree, Odin's horse. You have, the 9 kind of coming into play with that. You have Odin hanging himself, you have Drysdale, the horse, and all that other stuff. One of the things that I kind of, gravitated towards was Yargersfell sounds like Gardasil, which was the vaccine that was used in HPV. And it was a vaccine put out by Merck. And one of the main strains that I guess is responsible for cancer is like 16, 18, I think sometimes 11, 6, and whatever. But the thing that stood out the most was that it had first been developed for girls, and they were advising them to be given between the ages of 9 and 13. So 9, again, showed for something kind of similar. And I was like, well, that's kind of a stretch. Let me keep looking. Well, most of the HPV vaccine studies included a Delphi technique in that it was named after the Oracle Delphi, and it's a method to forecast decisions. So it assumes that are more valid than the individual judgments, and that method was used to predict market. Not so much the technique of developing vaccine theory or vaccine technology, but basically how could we put this out there and how could we implement it into public market, public health, public policy making. So it's interesting
Rand
that
Corporation was involved with the Delphi method, right? Which is just,
right,
of course,
right. And so then you have another software related to the Gardasil vaccine where it's called the Delphi Screener, and it basically simulate and estimate the history of cervical cancer screening in a hypothetical situation. So they kind of model it or project it out. And then one thing that I thought was very interesting is that when the girls, when it was discovered these girls had been victim of a crime, the tree of life became the symbol of their remembrance. And so I go back to, okay, we have again the Yggdrasil, the tree of Odin that he hung himself. The other thing kind of stood out to me was A.M. Abby Williams. I'm sorry. So A.M. meaning the axis mundi. But if you look at Abby Williams, if you flip the W, you get the M. And Abby was the one that was indicating the hanged man. So almost like an opposite or upside down. And she had the position of the branches on the girls that look like an A and M. So you have axis mundi. And I think AM is also important in Freemasonry as well as most Masonic things. But the other thing that kind of stood out, and it just happened while you were talking, Austin. So just bear. The numbers 4 and 3 seem to pop up and keep popping up. So we have a 43-second video from the girl's phone, right? Total of 43. Keegan, he got arrested. He was sentenced to 43 years in prison. Okay. So when you look at the day that the bodies apparently went, or what was it, February 13th?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you have a 2, you have a 3, and then you have 2017. So if you take away the ones, you have 2, 3, then 2, and that would be 4, 7. 4 and then 3 would be 7. And the reason I'm like, okay, why? Well, what is the one important or not? But then you timestamp that Abby posted that video, or somebody took a screenshot, and it was 2:07. So you have, that redundancy of like, maybe it is this. But I think 4 and 3 kind of show up a lot, but it's the number 7 that it's pointing to, right? Just kind of referring back and back. And so when you look at, what was the other one? The hangman in tarot is the number 7. When you look at Ronald Logan, when he died, 77. The other thing is, and one thing that I always found weird that nobody really picked up on, when you look at the way the girls that they were laid, right? And you look at the branches that were laid over them, they look like a 3 and a 4. And so if you look up what does the number 3 look like in runes, it's basically the V with a straight line coming down like this. Right. And then the other one,
what I think I described,
it looks like an F. Which is the 4. So it's 3 and 4.
Interesting.
And then you look at their ages, they're 13 and 14, leaving out the 1, right?
Wow.
So then you look at what is number 7 in Odinism, and it's to complete, to finish, right? I think so.
That's fascinating.
And then when you look at the number 7 in runes, it's an X, which you could argue that that's also what that the one with the branches with the long stick going across like that.
Yeah. Wow.
I don't know, just thoughts. And then really quickly, let me finish this. I'm sorry, because I'm like dying to get it all out.
Good.
Okay, so that was the runes. German Shepherd, we already talked about that. Yeah, we talked about that. Murders. Sorry. Oh, that was, yeah, the number 7, completeness. Kelsey, one of the things that I found really weird with Kelsey, she is the sister of Libby.
Yeah.
She kind of has abandoned who she was and taken on the role of, I'm living Libby's life, right?
Has she really? I haven't followed it since, honestly. Yeah.
And you had mentioned, and early on we heard this, that there was a Purdue professor that came out and said, it's not that, blah, blah. But then now they can't find him, right?
Yeah.
Whatever stance he or she took, I don't know. But it was a Purdue professor. I remember that. And then all of a sudden they couldn't find who he was. What's interesting is that Kelsey has taken on, I guess, the narrative that she wants to grow up and become a forensics or go into forensics. And she's currently taking classes at Purdue University.
Oh my God, you're blowing my mind right now.
What? So it's like, is it with the same professor? Like, I don't know.
Yo,
like,
what the
Right.
Except
That's
I don't know.
crazy.
And so there is that. And then what you had mentioned, I'm so glad you mentioned him. You mentioned, what's his name, Brad Holder. And he had a bunch of Facebook posts prior to the case or prior to the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And they said that it's weird how he was like, he had all these Facebook images and they were kind of indicating certain things that kind of led to one of the murders or what have you. But one of the common theme that he had in his images was the what is it called? Thuinzas? I can't pronounce that. But it's basically the rune for the number 3.
Wow.
So that one where everybody's like, oh, it looks like an F, but we don't know what the other one is. It looks like a 3. I mean, I think it does. Maybe it doesn't.
That's how they connect. That's basically what I was just getting to. Basically, was just how the Rushville Delphi connection to the individuals who are part of the same group, the gang, right? The Vinlander gang, I think, is what they refer to themselves as. Which, if you look up Vinlander, you get this historical text that seems to be very much involved at a crucial level of the ideological framework that they kind of exercise. It seems to be a sort of like almost origin story of the Vinlander, and they're like it's very strange. It almost feels like some sort of reflection of a Knights Templar connection almost. It honestly does.
Yes. And you're absolutely right with the whole Knights Templar, because again, we go to Axis Mundi, and they were the ones that pretty much bring Axis Mundi into the zeitgeist. Yeah.
Wow.
And that's where
My
you get
God.
the Templar basically go into the Rosicrucians, and they go into the Masons, and then they go into all the other secret societies that kind of come out of that.
Wow.
And I believe they were Germanic of sorts.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. That's where I think a lot of there's a lot of Germanic imagery that's used in the context of the Vinlanders, which I find interesting, and that's another reason why I think they called them essentially neo-Nazis. In a certain way, they said they were basically fundamentally sort of white supremacists, right? Which I found interesting, but basically, and I have to share this picture of Brad Holder in a moment, but that whole point, as far as there's a connection to this individual by the name of Johnny Messer, and this is where the Facebook posts come into play, which is so crazy, as you were mentioning, how they're kind of recreating the same photos that each of them are posting on their Facebook pages around the same time, which that to me, is kind of another sort of perfect avenue into witnessing this sort of flex that they're very proud of this and initiatory event, I think, or finality. I mean, what exactly would you call it? What is it called whenever you move up in the context of a secret fraternal organization?
Promotion. Just kidding.
Yeah, basically, yeah. You're 100%. You're promoted within the society. Yeah, and so basically the unified command, they discovered this, at least disturbing Odinist evidence was provided to them that proved by the task force that there were connections from the members of the Vinlander group in Rushville to the members of the Vinlander group in Delphi. And that's where you have this Johnny Messer individual from Rushville who comes into the picture. And Johnny was allegedly a recruiter for the Odinists, right? For the Odinites. Also, and he seems to provide this connective tissue between the two areas. And the Odinites, Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall, are then connected to the Rushville suspects, Elvis Fields and Rod Abrams, right? Who Elvis is the one who asked the troop, if you find my spit on one of the girls, right? Who told his sister that he spit on him and that he was responsible and a part of the killings and at this ritual, the night before, that he had told his sister. And so that is where the connection kind of forms. And Delphi it's like 125 miles basically from Rushville, and law enforcement were aware that Johnny Messer was friends with Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall. And so it was also known that Messer was acquaintances with Elvis Fields and Rod Abrams. So this is the recruiter for the Odinites. So basically, it appears as if this connection was then chalked up to a simple, bizarre coincidence by the Unified Command. Legitimately, that's how they explain this away. They just act as if this is an actual coincidence, and we shouldn't look into the statements that were made by anyone surrounding these individuals or the individuals themselves, which clearly show that they have no real alibi that's legitimate and credible, and yet that doesn't force or at least it doesn't, of course, force the investigators to pursue that at any real level of honesty or integrity. And that proves out to me that the Unified Command was clearly compromised, especially what takes place with the task force. So Elvis Fields, right? So you have this crazy connection between Elvis Fields, Rod Abrams, Brad Holder, and Patrick Westfall, who are sharing this common acquaintance in Johnny Messer, who's the recruiter for the Odinists. But it turns out that Elvis Fields and Brad Holder, they happen to also follow each other on Facebook while mimicking each other's Facebook pages, with Elvis Fields actually recreating the photos that Holder posted on his Facebook page. So this is shocking as hell, because I believe it was August of 2023, there was a deposition, and Jerry Holman was the Unified Command member who claimed that he did not even know who Johnny Messer was, nor what the evidence showed of Messer's possible role in the murders of Abby and Libby. And this is after the task force has provided all the information, including these individuals as key perpetrators potentially involved. And so he's already, I think Jerry Holman, member of the Unified Command, was one of the key compromised individuals who helped facilitate the cover-up, and that continues to show itself. But there's it's Johnny Messer was cleared as a suspect, just like Brad Holder, when and that was all. You're cleared while still considering the fact that Johnny's ex-girlfriend, Taylor Hornaday, she told police that Johnny Messer and Patrick Westfall were like brothers. She also told police that she had allowed Johnny to borrow her car on or around Valentine's Day 2017, and that Johnny drove her car, up there to hang with his Vinlander friends. So he drove as if he had driven 125 miles up to Delphi to hang with his Vinlander friends. When he returned his vehicle, or her vehicle, it had dried blood over one side of it. Johnny Messer refused to discuss the details of how the blood got there, and his ex-girlfriend further states that it took her several car washes to finally remove this blood. Meanwhile, Messer has claimed that he had never, not once in his life, been to Delphi, home of his brother, Patrick Westfall, right? And near the home of his other Odinite brother, Brad Holder. And again, Vinlander is a word allegedly interchangeable with those that practice Odinism. As State Trooper Roland Purdy stated in his deposition, all members of Vinlanders are also Odinists. And also it says that the Vinlanders are a white supremacist group consisting of Odinists. Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, and Johnny Messer were all affiliated with the Vinlander group. Johnny Messer's ex-girlfriend, the same woman, Taylor Hornaday, she also would confirm that all Vinlanders were also all Odinists, and that Johnny Messer, Brad Holder, and Patrick Westfall were all members of the Vinlander. So Taylor Hornaday, Messer's ex-girlfriend, she would continue on to tell law enforcement that Brad Holder and Johnny were two of the most violent people she knew and were fully capable of having been involved in the murders. Now, the same woman would state that a motive for their involvement seemed to have been the concept of, quote, blood in and blood out, which means social acceptance into their secret circles. This was an initiatory blood sacrifice. I mean, that's what it seems as if took place. But all this information was relayed to one of the leaders of the Unified Command in Leggett and the entire Unified Command team. But no guidance whatsoever or capitalization on this information in any way toward actually solving these murders was actually pursued. And so, although Unified Command learned that Johnny Messer's ex-girlfriend had been listening to and recording Johnny Messer's phone calls, police secured the phone and listened to 3 phone calls involving Johnny. In 2 of those phone calls, Messer was, quote, offering money to other people to find someone so they can be injured or killed. The 3rd call involves Messer, quote, bragging about holding a subject hostage and shooting them at his house. So when you go through the memorandum and the affidavit and all the court documents that are provided in the Delphi case, it is fundamentally, in my mind, it's impossible, to sort of just at the very least ignore, these details are so condemning and damning details, in my mind, actually providing us with legitimate perpetrators, the names of the individuals involved, where they were on the night of the murders taking place, how their alibis completely fall apart if you attempt to, at any level, corroborate the legitimacy of the alibi. It doesn't stand up, and they each rely on each other to sort of make these false statements, and the official Unified Command would do everything in their capability to ignore all of these connections and all of this corroborative evidence, and then, with worse than that, withhold it all from the defense and the prosecution, because I believe the judge was obviously in bed with the prosecution itself. But the fact of the matter is, they essentially said nothing to see here in regarding Johnny Messer, right? And Patrick Westfall and Brad Holder. And so none of them, there no search warrants for any of them were issued. So then you have, of course, the Odinite correctional officers who are abusing Richard Allen. And that's very strange, because there's in Odin We Trust is a patch that was being displayed with symbols of Odinism on their actual prison guard uniforms in the Westville Corrections facility. And so it's obvious to me that you have these members of the Westville Correctional Facility who are legitimately abusing Richard Allen during throughout the course of this investigation, and then after he's apprehended in the case going forward to the trial. It's fascinating to me how it all kind of takes shape. But so it turns out that 2 of these individuals, who were the Odinite correctional officers, alleged to have abused Richard Allen while he's in custody and intimidated him, right? Apparently, their names were Sergeant Robinson and Sergeant Jones. And these officers were boldly wearing these patches, right, on their DOC uniforms. So beyond that, you have, and they were in the form of these interlocking triangles, I think, that I saw you pull up earlier, Nick, where I'd seen you pull up a lot of different symbols, and one of them was these interlocking triangles that very obviously I had gotten a picture of one of the patches that was on the correctional officers' uniforms, yeah, it was so clearly obvious that it was an Odinite symbol. And
you know what I
Go ahead.
thought, just real quick, I wanted to throw this in, Austin. I thought, when I came across this and I heard about this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it made me remember. And me and Lux originally, when we did the Occult Rejects, I did it with him, and we had covered the fuck was that shit? That insurrection. Supposed, whatever the fuck you want to call that thing. And you had that QAnon shaman guy.
Yeah.
We covered that whole thing where that guy was like practically dressed up. Like, I can't remember the ritual because Lux was the one who found it. I was like kind of looking at other things, but that guy pretty much fit like a ritual that was going on. And I found it interesting how he did have that symbol on his chest as well.
Oh, of course.
Just like, like, is this all theater as well? It's hard to explain. Like, it's just, and again, like, I'm not saying, I don't know how to say this. There are people on the far right who are interested in Trump. Just put it that way.
Right.
So,
going. I mean, how much? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it could just be going back to people that are interested in that shit and into the occult.
100%. And I mean, you see the Templars and the strange loyalists to certain. Le Circle, P2. I mean, how many different members are surrounding Trump at this moment who have affiliations and loyalties to these secret fraternal organizations that are pursuing a very similar agenda? I just, we can't believe our own eyes, and political puppets perform in the political theater, right? They perform their roles for the clearly this sort of aristocratic elite class that have fundamentally structured modern society to where they're insulated from accountability in more ways than one. And that's why, and also you have to be among the initiated or introduced to the ideas at the very least to not, kind of be seduced, right? Or at the very least not be able to identify the clear and obvious loyalist symbology and symbolism that surrounds many of these individuals who are trying to exercise and flex their loyal nature to their organization. But yeah, I think there's also like just symbols surrounding like, for example, whenever Trump's in the Oval Office and they're kind of performing some sort of, public, it clearly, have you not seen the strange shelf that's behind Trump, where every single presidential administration, they have different things that they put on the shelf, and for his background, it now seems to be all these gold statues that take on different forms, and it's very interesting because to me it looks like it's deliberate, and who knows what the ties are there, but I wouldn't at all be shocked. I saw something the other day that showed that there were clear reasons as to why Trump is the true German Shepherd. That's funny. But yeah, what's crazy about these?
He is German.
Officers,
he's Bavarian. So
of course, and you know what? I mean, I covered the Concora Boys Home, and Roy Cohn, his mentor, flat out raped Richard Kerr. Legitimately trafficked that dude from Concora Boys Home, and was a pedophile who ran sexual blackmail human compromise parties, where the Process Church, according to David Berkowitz, was supplying him with young children right at his human compromise parties, where he's living geographically very close to that of Trump at the time. And we all know at this point that Roy Cohn, he was responsible for actually blackmailing J. Edgar Hoover and the Blue Sweep parties, and so the idea that Trump hasn't been drenched in human compromise for generations, and that you can go back to, was it Murdoch, or who was the individual who, the money manager of the Rothschilds, who are like basically stating when Trump had to file for bankruptcy back in the day, that after it, and of course, he took over Royal Casino International, which has ties to the Meyer Lansky syndicate, but nobody talks about that. But of course, it blows me away, considering the fact that Trump would then purchase that very same hotel that was utilized for audiovisual blackmail for that Roy Cohn would blackmail J. Edgar Hoover with. And then he also happens to purchase Adnan Khashoggi's yacht, which is also entirely rigged with audiovisual blackmail, who was connected to the Maxwell Epstein network of running guns through Iran-Contra. And Epstein himself was right, living under a fake passport in Saudi Arabia under a different identity while he's embezzling funds from Adnan Khashoggi's arms smuggling operation. So to me, yeah, it's like, let's put all the individuals who are compromised by the Epstein network in charge of Epstein disclosure and see what happens. It's hilarious to me. But anyway, the fundamental point I was attempting to make with the symbolic nature of the correctional officers not only wearing the patches and clearly displaying their loyalties, but they also, just like Brad Holder, just like Patrick Westphal, they were also posting these Odinite symbols on their Facebook pages, clear displays of these runes and images, and so I think it was there was a photograph that one of the correctional officers, either Robinson or Jones, had displayed on their Facebook page as well, and it was like an altar, right? Some sort of Odinist altar that they were essentially utilizing or at least portraying on their page, and so something very similar could be found, almost identical, on that of the Facebook page of Brad Holder, which is fascinating to me that they were they were mimicking each other's Facebook pages with the symbology surrounding the case that had yet to go public, and that in itself is some sort of it's some sort of strange. Yeah, I mean, when you feel as if you're protected enough to where you can kind of flaunt your, it really is kind of outwardly taking credit. You know what I mean? In a way to where you feel as if you have no concern about legitimate consequences being, coming around the corner and enduring them at any real level personally. So, yeah, to me, it seemed as if this was a perfect display of how confident they truly were, the individual perpetrators involved in this. And it goes to show that whatever Patrick Westphal had told Brad Holder, or when they had their alleged falling out after this ritual murder, that according to Amber Holder, right, Brad Holder's ex-wife, that Patrick Westphal, he had powerful people he was connected with, and they were protected essentially from any real accountability. And so that goes to show, I think, that obviously beyond the connection to the prison system and the correctional officers themselves being loyal to the group, who are obviously apparently abusing Richard Allen during the course of his, just being, obviously in custody. It was just like at every level, there's not justice that's being pursued and at any, it's kind of extraordinary to look at this case and see that none of these Odinist signatures in the crime scene were pursued at any level. And so, the Odinist patches were later apparently, as the prosecution realized that the defense had discovered the fact that these Odinist patches were being worn by the correctional officers who were essentially abusing Richard Allen and obviously there and present whenever Richard Allen would discuss any of the details of his case with his family members or his defense team, that basically, they had removed their patches in a very timely manner. And just as the defense had discovered and were going to make it public, all of a sudden the patches of loyalty to the Odinist group were removed from the correctional officer's uniform. And so that in itself kind of provided a smoking gun as to the fact that they had insider information, insider knowledge. Things were going around and very quickly in terms of, oh no, they've discovered this connection, we have to now cover our tracks. And then it being entirely, just ignored from then on, basically going forward. And all of this was sort of, I think there was a process of concealing this very important information in order to falsify the evidence, right? And that was the whole point, was to in the context of the memorandum, it basically legitimately says that they were falsifying the information in order to bolster the bogus timeline of the state. And so that in itself, I think I think that's a correct interpretation of how it happened. And when the FBI was removed from the Delphi case, that in itself proves out to kind of lend credibility to the idea that obviously this was not going to come out publicly in any real way. And so there was like essentially the state police superintendent. He decides he's going to pull the plug and kick the FBI off the Delphi murder case in 2021. And all of that is over some conflicts, apparently, some sort of ridiculous alleged conflicts. They're going to force the FBI off the case. And this all happened at the exact same time that one of the federal agents in the investigative task force was essentially executed in broad daylight. And so what we have here is Todd Click, right? The former investigator on the task force. He's thought to have been the strongest piece of evidence for Andrew Baldwin and Brad Rossi, the attorneys for Richard Allen. And and so basically this 3-man investigative unit that formed in 2018, as I mentioned, was formed in order to investigate, obviously, the Odinism connections to the ritual killings. And so you had, in the exact same time that the FBI is removed from the murder case, you have this task force that's disbanded. And so this task force is disbanded at the exact same time that Detective Greg Ferenczi is murdered in 2021. Just after is when the task force is disbanded and the FBI is removed from the case. So this is all very interesting to me because a federal grand jury in Indianapolis, they essentially returned an indictment charging this Terry Hout man with the murder of a federal officer. Now, when you look into who killed Detective Greg Ferenczi, who was on the Odinism task force, it turns out that it was this individual from Terry Hout who was he attempted arson of a federal property as well and used a firearm in order to commit the killing, obviously. But his name was Shane Mian. All right, he's 45 years old at the time, and it turns out this is July 7th, 2021. And he decides he's going to show up to the federal building where Officer Greg Ferenczi is located, who's a member of the 3-person task force. And so it turns out Meehan had previously been charged by a federal criminal complaint filed on July 8th. And according to the documents, Meehan drove his pickup truck to the gate of the FBI resident agency building in Terry Hout. Meehan exited his truck and threw a Molotov cocktail toward the building. Just after, Terry Hout police detective and FBI task force officer Gregory Ferenczi, it was almost as if he just pulls up to the federal building, lobs a Molotov cocktail at the building in order to lure out the only individual, right, let's say Greg Ferenczi is clearly the priority target. But this is an attempt to lure out a federal agent in order to execute them on the steps. Like, it very much seems as if this is what happens, because it turns out that he drives to the federal building. He exits his truck, throws a Molotov cocktail toward the building. And just after this, you have Greg Ferenczi walk out of the FBI building and confront Meehan. And he's holding a gun at the time. Meehan shoots the task force officer and he dies shortly after. And so the FBI agent inside the office allegedly heard the shots, came out and got into a gun battle with Meehan. And so Meehan was reportedly hit twice, managed to somehow get to his truck, drive to the hospital. He undergoes surgery for his wounds and was later taken into custody. Now, I looked this guy up and I discovered that Shane Meehan, this accused gunman in the shooting, happened to be a former employee of the high security federal prison in Terry Hout. So I thought instant connection to the potential correctional officers who had been clearly members of the Odinist group, and providing as far as just exercising their loyalty, obviously publicly. And so it looks as if I personally thought instantly this guy had some sort of connection to that very organization. And there was a reason why he had spent so many years at this maximum facility prison in Terre Haute. So it made sense to me. It fit this sort of, just fundamentally pattern recognition. It was hard to ignore. But he even runs for mayor, this guy, as an independent in 2019. And he finished last in a 4-way race with 1% of the vote. And if you can believe it, man, he ran on an anti-gun violence platform, which is so funny. And there's a video story on Mian and his candidacy for mayor. And it says he had lived in Terre Haute his entire life. He retired from the Terre Haute Federal Penitentiary and was working for UPS in 2019. Mian said he wanted to show that a political outsider could win, and said schools were one of the biggest challenges Terre Haute faced. But it turns out that a federal court would conveniently rule that Shane Mian, and this is in November 25th, 2024, he's not competent to stand trial for the 2021 fatal shooting of Terre Haute police detective and FBI liaison Greg Ferenczi. So to me, it lends credibility to the idea that this individual performed a targeted assassination on behalf of the organization to continue to, one, provide a pretext to remove the FBI from the case. Also to provide an avenue to legitimately disbanding the task force, who were solely, given the purpose of, as I mentioned before, investigating the Odinist signatures of the crime scene. So that in itself, fascinating to me, and especially since this judge clearly claims that he's suffering from a mental disease, rendering him mentally incompetent to the extent that he is unable to understand the nature and the consequences of the proceedings against him or assist properly in his defense. So to me, I also think, like, what happens if you are an asset and you're essentially, at times, I feel as if some of these assets are given false promises, right? As if they will come out on the other side of this sort of, with their proper defense and protection in place by by providing and showing and exercising their loyalty to the organization, they would be taken care of. But more times than not, I think they're kind of hung out to dry, and they're as far as what's it called when you're expendable. You're an expendable asset at this point. And so, okay, you're willing to go through this, but now we have to sort of convince the outside world that you have lost your mind effectively, and you are no longer fit to stand trial. And stop. Jesus, my dog's pissing me off. Anyway, so yeah, to me, I just thought that there's no way that this is what it seems to be, right? That at face value, this guy was, in my mind, I think kind of, he was, at the very least, he was an asset in my mind that was utilized in order to help the timing of it all too convenient. It's hard to believe in coincidence, but yeah. And then after this, following this, subsequently to it, you have the federal investigator Todd Click, whose career and reputation is entirely destroyed in order to remove him as a key witness on behalf of Richard Allen's defense, which made a lot of sense to me, right? And that's another reason why Judge Francis Gold would effectively block all testimony about Odinism during the trial of Richard Allen. And that is another reason how again, if the jury can't even hear the credible evidence that seems to have, real corroborative aspects to it, then of course, that this would be the case. You would effectively have no other priority, perpetrator that you would focus on, in my mind. And so that's why you have, he comes forward, Todd Click, just after all this takes place, and he testifies, right? It was early in 2024. He testifies that essentially this Nick McClelland is the prosecutor. Yeah, I was thinking that in custody, who wouldn't receive the MK Ultra treatment to a certain extent, right? You know what I mean? It's like, why wouldn't you?
Go hand in hand, right?
Yeah, why wouldn't you scramble the brains of Richard Allen at a certain level? And also, why wouldn't he come forward and say 60 different times, yeah, I did it, after he said this entire other, right? His defense, everyone involved is claiming, no, that's impossible, right? And he himself has provided so many details to the contrary, right? And so it just, to me, it seemed as if, especially seeing the transformation that he had once he was already in custody, he looks like a different person. If you saw him being ushered through in the smock or whatever he's in, and also consider the individual, Shane Mian, who's given the task of just driving up to the federal building and lobbing a Molotov cocktail to provoke the one individual you would need to execute in order to kind of like provide a plausible, reason or pretext to disband the task force and remove the FBI. Federal involvement, it makes sense. And so anyway, Todd Click, he feels the need to come forward, and I'm almost done finally with, we'll get to the end of this, and I'll come to a conclusion, but it's interesting because Todd Click, right? He comes forward. He's telling the prosecutor, Nick McClelland, after Richard Allen's arrest in 2022, that he's clearly concerned about the substance behind Allen's conviction, or as far as his arrest, in terms of the actual evidence and allegations against him. Yeah, that's a different person, dude. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that prison doesn't do that to you, but I mean, that's it
looked like he lost a lot of weight, bro, because in prison, a lot of people, I've never been, of course, but I can say a lot of people worked out, and my brother actually been in and out of jail and stuff like that. And before he went in, he was very skinny. When he came out for just a year, he was huge. And I was like, damn, what the hell was you doing? He said, all he did was work out, you know what I'm saying? And, you could look at his shirt, something happened to him. There's a reason why his attorney took his picture like that. So, I mean, I'm starting to see what you're talking about. I was pulling up the court documents and reading it and going through it and stuff like that. You're very knowledgeable on that. So I want to thank you for giving me this knowledge on it, because I like history and I love religion. I love mythology, and everything that you talked about goes back to some part of that. I mean, I brought up some of the tarot cards that you was talking about, and they had some of the Egyptian Sphinx on there. So all that stuff right there is something, like I was saying, symbolism plays a big old part in our communication. The problem is we don't have the knowledge behind what symbolism means, because everybody has their own, way of putting it in there. It's just like people making up their own new words for their own narrative, right? And you have to be knowledgeable on their narrative and their words to understand both.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I agree as far as like, and you look at the obvious transformation. Like, I personally, knowing just the individuals who have been affected by those very same techniques, and just like a Jack Ruby, for example, right? Where it's like, my God, that guy was obviously visited by Jolyon, West, Dr. Jolly West, right? And 100%. After this happens, what occurred with Jack Ruby, right? And remember when Tom O'Neill goes on Rogan and he tells him about essentially what had taken place to Jack Ruby while he was in custody. And essentially it was basically after Jack Ruby shoots Oswald, right? You have reporters who just go to his place and his apartment, rummaging around and all his things, and a significant number of those reporters who were rummaging around his apartment, they all just seemed to later die under very mysterious circumstances, of course. And so it turns out that basically Jolly West, when he inserts himself into that case, he goes to the Dallas County Jail, and in April of '64, right? And this is to psychologically examine Jack Ruby in preparation for his next trial. And this is right when Jack Ruby's like, I'm gonna blow the lid off of this shit. Like, if I'm not going to have complete and total protection, the MK Ultra Jack Ruby. And so and by the way, he's connected to the club where Heidi Reichen, the White House call girl, and all the individuals who were politically affiliated with the JFK assassination, they were partying at this club in Dallas, and Jack Ruby was there with Lee Harvey Oswald and Officer J.D. Tippit. 100%. And also, like, there were owners of football teams that were there. There was Texas oil men, like, and it was very interesting. But that was all in Phil Stanford's book, The White House Call Girl. Very interesting book about Watergate, technically. But I'll finish this point and then get back to the actual conclusion. But the point being is that Jack Ruby's willing to talk, right? He's like, man, if I'm going to have to take the fall for this, then I'm not going out silent, right? And so one of Jolly West's known techniques, by the way, was learned throughout his research in the 50s, okay? And this was how to induce insanity in a person without their knowledge or awareness. And so West goes in to examine Ruby, and he would emerge from the county jail with the press waiting for him to give a statement. And he announces that within the preceding 48 hours, Ruby happened to have an acute psychotic break that was irrevocable. He couldn't return to sanity. He had audio and visual hallucinations. And during the exam, he said Ruby hid under a table because he thought there were people in the room trying to kill him. He told West that he could hear Jewish children's screams outside his jail cell as they were boiled alive. That alone, I thought, was very interesting. And
That's
so,
crazy, bro.
especially when prior to his exam, West's exam, there was no evidence whatsoever that Ruby was mentally ill. And West was alone with him in the cell, and then treated him for the next 6 months. And by the time Ruby finally gave his testimony to the Warren Commission, he was reportedly babbling and incoherent. He grabbed the investigator for the Warren Commission named Arlen Specter, and he said, "Don't you know they're killing Jews? I can hear them being tortured outside my cell. They've killed my brother and cut off his legs." They couldn't use anything from Jack Ruby's testimony to the Warren Commission. That's the whole sole purpose of what happened to him, in my mind. That was induced insanity by Jolly West, who's a known operative behind MK Ultra, and worked directly under Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the black sorcerer of MK Ultra himself. And so yeah, with man, it's so fascinating. And I'll finish with this, really, because it's basically just that Todd Kleck was 100%. I think he was deliberately targeted to destroy his reputation, and it was all due to the fact that he was going to blow the lid off of this thing by providing the defense for Richard Allen with a key witness who was a member of an investigative federal task force investigating Odinism, and that is fascinating to me. So he he basically, Richard Allen, right? He expresses essentially Richard Allen himself, as I mentioned, he's just a shell of a human being anymore. And I'm not sure what his state of mind is at this point. I don't think he's making any statements whatsoever, but I haven't yet followed up. So I would like to at this moment, but I'm wondering what the latest is on his sort of defense attorneys and what they've kind of made public as far as their statements. Cause I'm sure there are some, more recent and more relevant connections here, but basically, Richard Allen's defense, they for the longest time, and still to this day, as far as I can tell, have held this belief that it was men with ties to Odinism that killed the girls as part of a ritual sacrifice. And it's essentially, they were no longer allowed to bring that information before the jury by October 14th of 2024, I believe. And that included information the defense may have had on Ronald Logan, Keegan Klein, including even like geofencing data. And McClelland objected to Click's assertions, claimed Click may have a history of lying. So he instantly he brings in the notion that, and kind of provides this sort of pretext to the public perception that this man has no, real credibility. And so this is the prosecutor, McClelland. So I think prosecutors, what are they known for? Right? It's like, I don't really think a prosecutor's word is worth taking at face value, but that's my personal opinion. And so he then requests Click's employment records after he makes that public statement. And And it was later reported in April of 2024 of last year, which that basically this is when Francis Gold, the special judge, had approved Carroll County Prosecutor Nicholas McClelland's motion to get Rushville Police Chief Todd Click's personnel records to discover if he had any issues that might impeach his credibility as a witness for Delphi murder suspect Richard Allen. That's the path you would take if you wanted to undermine the credibility of an investigator who had clearly what Todd Click claims is that the statements that had been made claiming that he had essentially lied in former reports that he had made or filed were all just deliberately manufactured lies in order to undermine his, for that sole purpose, to undermine his credibility. And so this is where after they get a hold of his personnel records, then this is when you have sort of this Click's investigation into the Odinists being involved in the killings of the Delphi teenagers, obviously being entirely just disregarded by the court judge, by the judge who was presiding over the trial itself, and the prosecutor then indicates that they believed Click's employee records would show, and this before they even looked at them, would show incidents of untruthfulness or credibility issues. So they're just laying the breadcrumbs for anyone who's following along with the reporting on this trial. And so in the subpoena that ordered so there was a motion, right, that was included in the subpoena that ordered the Rushville police chief to turn over the documents. And according to these online records, Francis Gold, the judge, signed the court order for the subpoena. And Rushville Police Chief Todd Click, member of the Odinism investigative unit formed in 2018, just after the killings, and an expected key defense witness in the Delphi murders trial, was subsequently arrested and charged by Ripley County authorities with forgery, official misconduct, and obstruction of a child abuse assessment while working as a family case manager with the Department of Child Services from July 2023 to March 2024. And that was when Judge Francis Gold used that as an opportunity to block all testimony about Odinism during the trial of Richard Allen. So that's all that it took. We burn Todd Click at the stake, right? We've already effectively managed Greg Ferenczi's dead, right? The other investigator, Kevin Murphy, I believe was his name. I think he saw the writing on the wall. You know, he basically says, man, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I know what's good for me. You know what I mean? Honestly, that's what it seems like, because I would like to look further into if he has had any kind of like just sort of like ethical, right, grappling with his moral foundation in certain aspects of how he dealt with this, and has come forward with any statement. I'd be very curious to find if that would have been the case, but who knows? As far as I know, Kevin Murphy's just kept his mouth shut from that moment on, and as far as I'm for one very skeptical of the charges being levied against former investigator Todd Click. Man, I mean, I think that this was a strategic undermining of his personal credibility, while you can sort of simultaneously provide the pretext for the judge to block all the testimony regarding the clear and obvious Odinist connections. And the initial hearing was held. It was in October of last year, right? And that's when you had Todd Click. He was released on an OR, you know, because he didn't have any. He didn't have any character issues. Like, what are we talking about? This guy was a member of a task force for a reason, because, you know, it's like, not saying that all federal investigators are moral or anything of that nature. I'm just saying that usually you aren't named to a task force unless you're compromised and your sole purpose is to sort of provide a misdirected narrative or at least control the framework of the investigation, you know, or you're undoubtedly some sort of honorable individual investigator who is trustworthy and you know, worthy enough of being placed onto an investigative task force of this kind, and that would have so much you know, as far as the consequences, the implication of the consequences involved in that very investigation. That's how I would feel, at the least. And so you have him being released on an OR, and the pretrial hearing was just a, you know, as far as it's a total joke. and his actual trial date was set for in February, right? And yeah, Todd Click was an innocent man, and so I think they've just forced him into retirement is basically what happened. And for me personally, I think this is evidence of kind of the inverted moral landscape that we perfectly reside in at this moment. And I think so much of what, like, the sort of, I think there's an inherent exploitation of the God hole within all of us. Whatever you believe that to be, or however you describe that in your own, kind of personal, just the terms you would prefer to utilize. I think it's fundamentally, we all are trying to make sense of this in a desperate way, in a way to where we're relying on these principles that many of us have yet to fully identify and acknowledge and become aware of, just as far as what are the ethical values worthwhile to pursue and exercise to add to my, what I believe as the core values worth upholding in my life. And therefore you become susceptible and vulnerable to this new age esoteric ideological system of control in an attempt to usher us into this trap of embracing these new age values that I believe are entirely in the framework of this, deliberately and deceptively manufactured inverted moral landscape. And here we are, we're surrounded by the pedophile elite. And I mean, we're attempting, and every 4 years we're basically convinced that we have a part to play in the system, and it's just, to me, I think what we should focus on most is our own personal well-being and our own legitimate core values and our own personal individual lives, and surrounding ourselves with people who I think bring the best out in you. And that is what I'm desperate to do, is surround myself with people who I admire and I can learn from, honestly, guys. And so anyway, at this point, I definitely believe that this was a deliberate attempt to obscure the vision of the general public. Right. And yeah, I think that this is an example and another window into the darkest layers of modern society, man. And we're largely remaining in the shadows. Right.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned earlier, we talked about mana and this sort of even potential cannibalistic nature of some of these, blood sacrifices, or at the very least, these sort of ceremonial, symbolic exercises that at least kind of lend their the entire ceremony to the idea and the symbolic nature of the blood sacrifice. I think it's just, to me, man, like it is very, very strange time that we're living in right at this moment, and it's up to us to remain headstrong, honestly, because I think these individuals that I view as through that same lens of know your enemy, right? I mean, we all, I believe, we all share a common enemy, right? And this common enemy is possessed with, honestly, the darkest ambitions, and the vast majority are very unaware, I believe. And so personally, I just think that the more conversations we can have where we attempt to shine a light in the darkness, make sense of what actually took place potentially, I mean, again, I view this as a far more plausible alternative theory than that of the mainstream narrative, right?
Oh,
and so that's the profound, as far as in my mind, there's this inverted moral landscape. It's essentially, it leaves us with this profound sense of righteous indignation in a certain way. And I think that's good. I think that we shouldn't be content with the current structured system in place, but also we shouldn't let it destroy us, because what is the intention? To set us on the path of ideological subversion. And what is the first stage? Demoralization, man. And so I try and steer away from that. I think there is beauty in conversations such as this, which I mentioned at the beginning, provides me with a real honest sense of hope moving forward. So yeah, man, I'm entirely under the impression that this was a legitimate cover up that essentially, it shrouded the actual just intentions behind the ritualized murder and blood sacrifice, and the belief system that is sort of standing tall behind the actual details of the criminal case and how the bodies were discovered and every aspect of it. And that has now been entirely set aside and ignored, and it's not even a part of the official narrative. And so that in itself, I felt like drew me to this story, because we're again intended to remain in the darkness and unaware of this sort of real power paradigm, how it kind of functions. So anyway, I don't know. It blows my mind, this case, I'll be honest. And it's unfortunate that, and oh yeah, I found something else about, I had discovered that there was a Freemasonic cemetery very nearby that death ritual site of Abby and Libby. And I forgot the name of it. I should have brought it. I forgot it till just now. I should have brought this source with me, because if I would have remembered, I would have pulled it. But there is a Freemasonic cemetery, a private cemetery, that is like eerily close to the area of where Abby and Libby were sacrificed. And that again kind of lends a little bit more of credibility to the idea that maybe Ronald Logan and was entirely connected to this Vinlander group and the individuals involved in the local chapter. And especially when you look at let me pull this up, because this is fascinating, and it's the picture I wanted to share with you guys before we get out of here. And that is it kind of blows me away. Let's see, blah blah blah. All right, see if I can share this. There you go, buddy. Now look at this guy. This is what William Ramsey sent me, basically saying that this could be the bridge guy. And this is one of the sketches, composite sketches.
Damn, he looks really close.
Very close, right?
Yeah,
then,
like you can't even like with the hoodie and the hat. Yeah, you definitely couldn't be able to tell.
100%. And then look at this. This is him.
Oh shit.
So 33, baby.
Yep. Yeah.
So somebody sent me that picture, and they said, "Hey, brother," and was just telling me I did well with William, and then sent me this. I believe it was posted literally 33 days after the killing of Abby and Libby. So that in itself,
that's crazy.
If this was posted on Brad Holder's Facebook page 33 days after the actual deaths of Abby and Libby, along with the symbolic nature of the runes that they were posting and the crime scene portrait that they posted that at least resembled directly that of the crime scene, then I believe this was Brad Holder was potentially the bridge guy, and I think that this had to have been an initiatory, ritual sacrifice. I don't know how else you could kind of explain it away, but
let's not forget that the G in, the Masonic symbol, the letter G is number 7 of the alphabet. So 7 again, 3 and 4.
My God, that's just crazy to me. And but yeah, we are now left with the consequential outcome being that Richard Allen is the sole perpetrator, right? And that he had no affiliation with Odinism or
they even got that picture on Wikipedia.
Do they
I
really?
just put it up. Yeah, they got that picture on Wikipedia. I just pulled it up. Yeah, it's
wow.
It's crazy. Yeah, and that's just too identical, man. That's just way too identical. At least close to like that. That's crazy.
I just couldn't. I couldn't. At every level, I was convinced, man. I'll be 100%.
Something's up.
Yeah, I'm convinced that that I feel like we named the perpetrators that murdered Abby and Libby today. I honestly do, and you know, the fact that these individuals are insulated from any real accountability and still remain, you know, outside of any objective pursuit of justice.
Yo, this is bugged out. Even the hat and everything, dude, matches that guy.
It does, man.
That's what I'm saying. Hey, let me ask you something, bro. Have you ever tried to contact him at the correctional facility in Oklahoma?
I have not, man. I just, I honestly, I probably should. Right.
Yeah, I try to look him up on there. They said that he transferred over there, but when you try to type in his name and his birth date and all that stuff into the correction facility, it says there's nobody there. And then, of course, on the top, it says in little small fine print, you know, it says, you know, they're updating their stuff and blah, 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 blah. But I mean, he's been there for a minute now, so they should have been done had his up. So yeah, something ain't right. And then the question is why did they transfer him in the first place? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Why did they transfer him? What was the point of transferring him? Was it for his safety? Was it because he was going to do some things that, you know, people were going to catch notice of it? And
Right.
when you transfer somebody, you don't necessarily have to update that information in there quick. You know what I'm saying? You can wait till the day they die and update and then say deceased.
100%, man. Yeah, that it doesn't feel right to me at all, and especially just after hearing that he was transferred, I instantly, you know, a red flag went up in my mind. Right, just it doesn't tend to happen for no reason, right? And especially considering the abuse he allegedly endured during the time that at Westville. Yeah, it only adds more to sort of the substance of what potentially could be happening theoretically to Richard Allen. I mean, how do you keep someone silent? How do you hide someone away convict them, give them the maximum sentence for each charge, right, that you possibly can, essentially force them to remain silent throughout the trial? I mean, it's honestly, it's crazy how what a sort of miscarriage of justice this really truly was in terms of Richard Allen and how his defense attorneys were treated. I'm telling you, I do believe that McClellan, the prosecutor, was entirely compromised. And we know that obviously, you know, the detective, was it Holloway or I can't remember now, but either way, the detective who was clearly one of the leading members on the Unified Command was obviously compromised as well, right? And so that, in my mind, beyond the fact that Frances Gold, the judge, did everything in her power to sort of stand directly in front of as far as she was making sure that she would take every single precautionary measure in order to make sure that none of this evidence would come forward and none of it would ever become public in terms of the individual jurors being exposed to it, let alone the defense having the ability to, you know, to utilize it. So how can you actually defend Richard Allen if you can't provide the Odinism defense?
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way. So that was all they had to successfully achieve. And I think they did, you know, honestly. So I'm not at all really surprised due to the fact that I just understanding the historical context of how they pursue these cover-ups and also the consequential outcomes of some of the most sadistic networks that seem to have state sponsorship. There's a hidden hand of intelligence that is clearly propping them up, putting them into these positions where they are insulated from accountability. And it's just, to me, it's another window into this sort of occult underground that, you know, is deliberately kept in the shadows. I mean, they would really appreciate if we weren't initiated, right, as far as our understanding and ability to interpret the motivation, the sort of intention behind many of these events. And because if you aren't even willing to have an open mind and consider the idea that a ritualistic sacrifice would be a part of these murders, then good luck solving this crime. You know what I mean? Like that's legitimately how it is. And so if you have the general public dismissing this at face value due to the extraordinary nature of the allegations themselves, that's a strategic outcome in itself if you're attempting a cover up, right? And I think that happens so often. And then they also are aware of the idea of using it in a layered strategic way to where most of the general public will inherently sort of dismiss these more extraordinary allegations if they are unaware of these connections and these unfortunate organizations that do exist that pursue these just obvious. People are unaware that it never ends with just human trafficking, right? The enterprise is wide in scope, and you have organ harvesting and every single layer to this it's a criminal enterprise where it all blends together, basically targeted assassinations, and human compromise, sexual blackmail, satanic ritual abuse, right? I mean, and at every level, there's truth to all of this. And it's been, I think, conveniently and strategically, there's been these sort of, I think, these very much misdirected just kind of mechanisms that were very much like laid into these strategic positions in order for the general public not to be able to come to terms with any of these ideas in a way where it seems like you can remain credible. And I think that's the issue, is that so many people, if you discuss something from this angle, they're concerned about being dismissed and their credibility taking a hit. And I think that's a huge mistake. It's obviously, I think, one of the reasons that this sort of preconceived notion has been very much conditioned into the minds of the general public, and it's for that purpose, So I'm just go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Before I forget exactly what you just said right now, I wanted to kind of capitalize on exactly what you said and kind of highlight what you said. And Nick has mentioned this before in other episodes, and we've kind of mentioned it when we cover some of this true crime stuff. If you want to look at each individual true crime situation, and everything is so questioned, everything's so questionable, one resounding theme you will see is that all the characters of the story are polarizing. You literally have a camp on either side of every single character in any true crime story. And I do believe that is on purpose. I do believe that there are characters as in a reality show. I'm not saying that that didn't happen. I'm saying this is probably the ultimate, reality TV. And if you look at specifically with the Delphi, they're wanting to bring cameras into the courtroom. They're wanting to televise what's being said. Why? Because so much money is being made off of the true crime industry, whether it is podcasts, whether it is GoFundMes, whether it is anything. I mean, I had heard that a lot of people had driven to Delphi, Indiana, just to look at the site. So that not only money in tourism as well. And you're talking about cornering a market that had yet to ever be explored. And now you're making bank, regardless of who it is, regardless of what angle it is. And then you're now also having these, expert witnesses that come for all of these high profile cases. If someone mentioned in the chat about the false memory, Loftus.
Oh man, yeah.
She has literally been in Ghislaine Maxwell's thing. She's also worked on other cases as well. It's escaping me right now. But if you look at the firm that she worked for, that firm also was expert witnesses in other serial killer or mass type true crime cases. Right. And so then you think, well, is this all by design? Well, if you look at the research that some of these psychologists or some of these forensic people are looking into, it's public perception. It's how can we sway the public? How can we put this into the zeitgeist and kind of sway opinion?
Right.
And we're now seeing the court of public opinion on stage as an actual person or character alongside the jury. Really, anything even more vocal than the jury itself. So I do think that that exactly what you just said, that I do think that also needs to be in the back of our mind, that this is potentially being woven for us as well for consumption.
Sometimes I wonder, like what you're pointing at, Lisa, you'll see that also kind of like carry over. I know this isn't going to sound the greatest, but you'll see that carry over into politics and conspiracies. And I think it's giving people the delusion that if they think they know something and they're saying it on the internet, it changes. And it's not going to change shit.
Right.
Bro, that's why there's so many damn arguments, because they believe everything they say shit. And then the funny thing is that when you try to correct them and give them a little bit of knowledge, or at least a little bit to help them on their journey, they want to, say all kinds of negative things to you. And that's when I turn into the Jerry Springer show.
I love it. And they'll always attack the messenger though, brother. I know that much. That's how I've experienced in my time, as far as just my personal. It is hilarious how like the individuals and love and should kind of like understand that you have their well-being at heart, that you're considering that at the very least. It's interesting how much people are far more open-minded to learning from perfect strangers than actually legitimately open-mindedly considering ideas from individuals they know and love, right? Because it's just a funny sort of situation to find yourself in. But I've learned that over time, obviously, like I'm not responsible for anyone else's sort of path, in terms of I feel like you have to kind of expose yourself to these ideas on your own terms, because if not, then I think it's always going to be sort of kill the messenger in a way, right? Because you are now kind of shaking their entire structured ideological framework of how society functions, and that's terrifying, because what happens when that veil falls to the wayside, you're no longer a naive child who's engaging in this sort of cartoonish black and white version of reality. You're starting to see the deeper layers of things. You kind of decide, you choose to do one of two things. You either slam your head back into the sand or run away kicking and screaming, or you continue forward and pursue that path of objectively, finding the truth. And like, you will only, I think, benefit in the long run if you have a decent moral foundation and certain ethical principles strongly in place. I think you only benefit in the long run from pursuing that objective truth. But yes, so very often I just witness, people sort of, they get very frustrated and upset and don't know how to defend their own sort of ideological, position. And so then they inherently act out. It's kind of like, it's like
nature, unfortunately.
That's why for me personally, I always, if I ever say something, I have a source by me. I would never say something after I have a source. And the only reason why is because I don't want somebody to believe what I'm saying. I want you to go and read the source that I've read that gave me the idea and belief that I have, that
exactly
at least gave you the chance, I at least giving you the chance to come up on that same thing. Now, if you have a source that I don't have, I'm going to buy that source and I'm going to research it. Then I'm going to go in there and break it down based off of everything else that I've learned throughout my journey. I don't care about being right. Being right has nothing to do with, I can't prove that I'm right, because for one, I can't go in the past and tell you what actually happened. I can just go to the people who are respected in the field, who have the knowledge behind the information, and I'll go there and I'll say, okay, this is what this person said. And that's it. Now, if you want my opinion is going to change. I cannot come up. I don't know how anybody sits here and says that they've done so much research and they come to one fucking conclusion. How? You've read so much shit, but you have one conclusion? No, I have thousands of conclusions of what possibly happened, because I know what different people have said. And I can take what they said and analyze it and put my mind and my passion into it and bring it to the world to say, hey, this is not me saying it. This is what the text say. And if you want to know what text it says comes from, I'm giving it to you. That's why you will always see me share a source. Always. I will always bring the source. And I've read thousands of books. I've had plenty of sources, peer-reviewed articles. I have my own book. I stick to the foundation. If you don't know the foundation, you can't build a house. You just can't. 100%. So my foundation is what the basics of the information says. And I'm going to find the individuals that have that information, and I'm going to bring it to the world and say, hey, these are probably the people you want to look at. Now, this is what I like to do the most. Just because I read one thing, I'm going to find the other thing that counters it. So that way I can see what the hell is in the middle, because there's always three sides to the story. One, their side, there's the other side, and then there's the side in the story in the middle. That's what I'm coming in. And I'm a Libra, so I'm going to try to balance that out as much as possible. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, okay, you're right. Okay, now you're wrong. Now you're right. Okay, now you're wrong. And I'm going to keep shifting it until I come to an understanding for myself. Now, what I believe is based off the information that I've learned. You know, to learn what I've learned, you have to go through the same shoes that I did to get there. You know what I'm saying? So,
I say the same thing, man. Honestly, I for quite some time now, I've said all that I bring to the table are, you know, legitimate sources that have convinced me otherwise. Right. And so all that I ask are, you know, if you're interested, you would like to dig further, you would like to attempt to corroborate some of the evidence I put forward, like go to the sources that I mentioned, and definitely read through them yourself, because I wouldn't have brought it to the table if I hadn't been fully convinced otherwise through this kind of avenue of you know, accumulating these various sources that provided me with this far more plausible alternative theory. And that's all I'm doing. I'm hoping that people will see that this is what changed my mind. And that's the reason I'm bringing it to the table, is because I think it's profound. And also, I think it's very important to not have this sort of ultimate, at least agenda. I don't really have an agenda. I'm just attempting to pursue the truth, man. And through that, it's like, you want to go along the ride with me? Because I would love for that. You know,
it's going to be a bumpy ass ride, bro. I'm telling you, it's going to be a bumpy ass ride.
No doubt.
Your opinion has, if you're doing research, if you're really doing research, your stance has to evolve. It has to evolve. If it does not evolve, you might as well just give it up now, because that is the purpose, is to evolve in your stance. And exactly what Tyler said, some of these older scientific articles that you look back and that are so well done, they have exactly that in their discussion. They give you the results, but then they present the papers that basically support their data, and they also provide papers that don't support their data. And then kind of towards the end, they give an analysis of why they think the papers that did support their data said that, and why the papers that didn't support their papers may have said that as well. So it's a very balanced delivery of a discussion based on your results.
Yeah. You know what I always tell people? I see everybody, a lot of people says, oh, you just want to be right, Rebirth. You just want to be right. I don't want to be right. I want to be wrong. And I'll tell you why I like to be wrong. It's because I learn better being wrong. I learn from my mistakes. And I don't want to repeat the same stupid shit that I said before. If you gave me a source that counters what I said and it's accurate, I'm going to be like, okay, damn, shit, I was wrong. Well, I wasn't wrong. My source was wrong. So now I know better. So next time I can say, okay, this is what I've learned, and this was what this person taught me afterwards. It's not about being right for me. It's just about gaining knowledge. I can't live in a bubble. I can't live in the bubble of thinking that one thing is right. That's why I like to read something that goes with what I learned, and then I like to go read something that goes against it. So I'm reading the counter argument. And I'm reading many of these counter arguments, and I'm finding the people who argue with each other, right? A lot of people don't realize this. In the Greek times, there was a time when they would go to the middle of the city or some, area, and two people would have a discussion, and there would be arguments. They would curse at each other. They would tell each other stupid and this, that, and third. And then the next day they would go back there, and then they would have that same discussion. And they would say, well, did you look up what I told you, or did you do your due diligence from that? And if you don't do your due diligence, then you're only just trying to create a narrative for people to believe what you believe. I don't want people to believe what I believe, because I'm telling you, you're not going to be able to believe what I believe, because it's going to change daily. Every time I pick up a damn book, my mind goes from regular to exploding, you know what I'm saying? Because I can't figure out what the hell. I had one idea just 2-3 days ago, 2-3 months ago, 2-3 years ago. I read something that totally changed that. Now I'm going back to the beginning with everything. And but I love that because it tells me that, hey, I'm evolving. Just like Lisa said, I'm evolving. I'm taking knowledge and I'm saying, okay, I learned this 2-3 years ago. It wasn't correct. And let me go ahead. And that's why I like a lot of revised books, because if you read the revised books, and I give you a perfect example. A lot of people talk about Darwinism a lot. Don't realize that Darwin revised his books over and over again until he died. And if you're picking one thing out of his book that you're going to create a narrative on, I can go to a revised version and be like, well, shit, he did say he messed up there. So what's your point now?
Right.
So
absolutely. I admire that, man. That's a beautiful characteristic to embrace, honestly, and live by. I appreciate because you can't have, as I mentioned, an agenda to be right. That doesn't even make sense, you know? And so my entire goal is just to, once again, somehow make sense of it for myself. Right. And through that process, I hope to discover the objective truth, right? That's the goal. And so I'm always attempting to consider the counter argument, as you mentioned before. And because if you aren't giving yourself a well-rounded picture of the full spectrum, right? The broad scope of things, then you're limiting your vision and perspective. You're not going to have the ability to engage in an honest way in the first place, because you're at a disadvantage inherently. So that you put yourself in that position, right? And we're all in that position anyway. We're all under as far as like there's so many things that we've all yet been exposed to, have yet to be exposed to. I mean, right? And that in itself leaves us at a disadvantage. But all we can hope for is to remain sort of centered and grounded in a way to where we are acknowledging that fact and moving forward, you know, understanding that there's so much more for me to learn here. But still, I think that in terms of these, like the example of Delphi itself, right? I think it takes getting yourself to kind of like you have to already be digging below the surface at a deeper layer of understanding before you're even willing to engage with a case such as this from the angle that we're taking. You know what I mean? I think that I stumble across many of those people, but fortunately for us, there's a lot of sloppy psychological operations happening all over the place, you know, at all times. And you know what I mean? And I think they're right. They're
He's got too
revealing
many going on. They're getting sloppy about it.
100%. And so more and more people from all walks of the political spectrum are becoming more willing to, you know, at least engage in certain more open-minded conversation than I've seen previously. I do appreciate that. And I think that, you know, maybe that is a sign for optimism at the very least, you know, but at the same time, it's like, once again, I'm not responsible for any of that. It's just, you know what I mean? I'm just here hoping for the best, expecting the worst most of the time. And that's not a black pill. I just think it's a little bit of being realistic in a certain sense. Just as far as holding out hope for political puppets and things of that nature is just, you know, to me, ignorant. You know, you've yet to learn from your previous mistakes, right? And so I'm grateful that I can opt out of this and kind of distance myself from feeling as if I play a direct part in the consequential outcome and the nature of the current state of reality and the power paradigm itself. Like, man, we're all kind of just children waking up in the middle of a movie theater, right? Like trying to figure out the plot. Like that's honestly what it feels like.
Into the movie, right? Yeah,
100%, dude.
Yeah,
And,
that's how I feel. Like we're all children still at the chalkboard trying to learn our alphabet in all of this. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and I put it in when I was on Nephilim Death Squad the other day. They asked me because I've been like, I think I've just been probably over. I think I've been having too many of these. Like, first of all, I've been remaining on this path of investigation into certain child trafficking networks. I've spent too much time bogged down in the disgusting, disturbing details of the cases and things of that nature. and it has an overall emotional toll. It legitimately does. And you have to, like, for your own well-being, pivot away to different directions of interest and pursue other avenues of thought. Because I remember, and Raven put it as, I sort of gazed into the abyss, that sort of situation. And all that it reminded me of was 8mm, the film by Nicolas Cage in '99, right? So crazy. And it kind of introduces the concept of a snuff film.
I'm gonna watch that today.
Remember that shit
broader
as a
general
kid?
public.
It freaks me out when I was a kid.
It's disturbing, brother. Yeah. But gosh, I mean, like, the issue is that snuff films have been essentially labeled as and mischaracterized as an urban myth for how long? I mean, it's just laughable at this point, right? And that kind of fits perfectly with the manufactured, sort of satanic panic hysteria attempt to mislabel and misdiagnose and misdirect the truly occurring and legitimately, at least I think there's plenty of evidence that proves that real satanic ritual abuse has occurred, and they say the satanic panic was sort of just this way to, clearly sort of, I think the point was to obviously create this really this manufactured misconception. I think that was the ultimate agenda there, and it sort of falls in line with the concept of serial killers at this point as well, I think personally, but it's this manufactured misconception that was the conveniently constructed satanic panic excuse and just an oversimplification of mass hysteria. And in reality, 8mm, the reason that I brought it up, because it reminded me that, one, this is what I do love about sort of, having a fictional narrative be extremely valuable in terms of introducing the public to the notion that snuff films exist, and 8mm film strips are how effectively these pedophile networks can circumvent being discovered through shipping child pornography through the mail. And so if you keep them as undeveloped 8mm film strips, then they will not be able to discover what's on the film, and therefore you can sort of circumvent the legal process and distribute child pornography. And so I didn't realize that until recently, but in watching that movie, there's a scene, right, where Joaquin Phoenix is a character in the movie, and he basically works at a porn shop, and he's behind the counter, like he essentially is selling things behind the counter, below, under the table, behind the counter. He'll sell things on behalf of the criminal enterprise that's participating in, let's say, child pornography or ritualistic abuse snuff films, things of that nature. And I'll remember when he took him to this sort of this underground pedophile establishment where there's all these rooms where they're screening these snuff films and these child pornography films. And he takes Nicolas Cage there, who's basically this private investigator who got hired by this elitist, a widow woman who she just became a widow. Her husband was a kind of a member of a higher echelon of society. She had all the respect and love for him in the world. At least that's how the plot is staged at the beginning. And she discovered in his private safe after his death this undeveloped 8mm film strip. And so she calls up, gets this private investigator who's Nick Cage, who comes and screens privately this 8mm film strip. And he viscerally reacts to the point to where he instantly thinks this is real. There's no way this is faked, although he tries to justify for himself this is faked. But he reacts like anyone would if they saw a real person go through that. You know what I mean? Which to me, obviously, it makes it far more in terms of, I think it, and obviously it was a snuff film in the context of the plot. But the point being that the character Joaquin Phoenix told Nicolas Cage's character before he enters the room to screen one of those snuff films. And he tells him, you dance with the devil doesn't change. The devil changes you. And that like resonated with me. Honestly, it did. And I think it's just because I've overexposed myself to a lot of the disturbing details in terms of how many of these child sex trafficking operations have functioned. It resonated with me to my soul,
That's why I'm pissed that the Epstein list didn't get. And I'm sorry to deter
you're
from that.
good,
But
buddy.
I'm pissed that that's why the list hasn't been brought out, because all we heard for the last few years is once I make this presidency, I'm going to release the records. Then they said they had the shit on the fucking table and the desk and all this, and boom, now it's fake. Now it's fake, and I'm just like, come on, man, these are children, yo. Like these are fucking children. You know what I mean?
Most vulnerable among
And
us. Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? And if you have children, you know that's going to hit deep in your heart. And I mean, I'm not saying that anybody that doesn't have children won't, but Jesus Christ, like what the fuck, man? Like some people don't put their, I just don't get it, bro. And it really irritates me and pisses me off that people treat children like this. You know what I mean? Kids don't have a protective, how can I say
they have no protectors. Yeah.
They have no protectors except us. And the ones that are supposed to be protecting them, they're just throwing everything under the bridge like it's not shit. You know what I'm saying? I'm telling you, I could never witness something like that and keep my mouth closed. I just couldn't. I couldn't. You know what I'm saying? And it's crazy that we got to this level of shame that we're putting on our human side of things. You know, there is no reason why that a child should have to worry about whether they're going to live and die when they go outside, that they're going to get kidnapped. You know what I'm saying? There's no reason that a child should have to worry about that. No person, period, should have to worry about that, but children let alone. You know what I'm saying? The most vulnerable, like you said. It's sickening, man.
Man, you know, when I covered the Franklin scandal, oh man, I'm telling you, it was Franklin led me to the Finders, and I wound up at Marc Dutroux. And it's just like, my God, it never ends, man. You know, but I'm under the impression now, and at some point in the future, we might have to do another one on this, because I'm so well aware of the overlapping connections between Franklin, the Finders, the Atlanta child murders, the Dean Corll murders in Houston, John Wayne Gacy. Dude, John Wayne Gacy was legitimately.
That makes sense.
Oh yeah. It's crazy. And we have, you know, it's the politically protected sort of pedophile underground. That's what it truly is. And the Franklin scandal, the way I described it was it truly kind of exposed the cognitive dissonance, forcing us to grapple with the psychological consequences of a corrupt system designed to protect prolific predators in the elite strata of society, who have strategically forged political connections and media influence. A dark and twisted odyssey revealing a nationwide pedophile network pandering children to America's power elite. And Nick Bryant himself, who wrote the Franklin scandal, he says, this stuck with me forever. And when we had him on the show, I brought this up. And it legitimately, when I read this, it's what truly took, for me, the Franklin scandal helped really remove that veil of naivete in terms of how these state-sponsored child trafficking operations have truly, you know, been facilitated and covered up. And what he said in terms of our society in the book, he writes, I wasn't so much anguished by the threats and intimidation I endured, delving into the arcane mysteries of this universe, but rather by the realization of its very existence, a universe that encompasses the refined industrial destruction of children and its cover-up by the very state and federal authorities who have pledged to protect children from the depravity of evil men. The children and our society as a whole have been betrayed. And that just, like, you know, my heart and soul could not be represented you know, in any better way, honestly. And this is the environment we exist in. And it's up to people like us who are at the very least willing to dive into these dark avenues of investigation. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's only then that you can kind of provide yourself, right, with some sort of a fundamental framework for how this is truly being facilitated underneath our noses and before our very own eyes, you know? And yeah, Dutroux, my God. Dutroux is the worst thing I've ever read in my life. I've never been more affected than when I read through the X1 dossier, right? The Belgian X-Files. we're talking the most sadistic and sinister forms of sexual abuse on children you could ever imagine. I couldn't even imagine it until I read through it. That's how disturbing it is. And I never in my life did I read something and legitimately, dude, I couldn't read the next sentence, you know, like I knew what I was about to read, and I had like viscerally turned my face away from the computer, said, fuck that. You know what I'm saying? Like it like affected me that deeply. It's just, I don't know how you're not even human, you know, if you can do something like that to another person, let alone a child, you know. But anyway, damn. Sorry guys. I'm like, I haven't eaten all day. It's like 1 o'clock for me.
Good,
so that doesn't help my personal
Well,
state.
this was wonderful, man. This was wonderful.
This was great. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Wilson. Appreciate you.
Of course, man. But I really am willing, if you guys ever want to in the future, do another episode on something that has to do with this, because this is probably my wheelhouse more than anything at this moment. Unfortunately, is the brutal, unfortunate reality of these sadistic, sinister child trafficking operations. And yeah, unfortunately, there's more evidence than you would ever like to discover. You know.
Yep. And not to belabor it, but I think another tangent that maybe we can even do another episode on. It's not just pedophilia. It transcends that, in that some of these groups or these secret societies are trying to manifest or trying to bring God into a vessel and control it. And so sometimes we have to somewhat see it from a different perspective. It's still wrong, it's still evil, it's still all that, but you also have to see it that it's also for the benefit of themselves, not just in that regard. And I think it gets chalked up into, oh, it's Satanism or it's ritual Satanism and abuse and blah, blah, blah. And so they just lump it into this category and it just goes on a shelf and we never look at it again. But it's just that. And it's not just that. It's so many other facets of so many other things. Anyway,
actually,
not to be
chalking it off as Satanism, I think actually kind of plays down like what really could be.
Absolutely.
100. Yeah, it plays it down.
I just think satanic ritual abuse, I use the term because I think it refers more to, like, SRA to me refers to like this layering in sort of, there's a mind control aspect to it. There's obviously trauma-based mind control through the monarch techniques, you know, administering these altars. Hypnotism so much is definitely involved. Pharmaceuticals very much involved. But, you know, it's like they have to distort your brain chemistry. They have to disrupt your neural pathways. Like they create, I couldn't imagine when I was reading the X dossier, hundreds of different altars she had, and each of them were they were different ages. They spoke differently. One of them was the whore that they had created in her, where she acted as if she deserved everything that happened. You know, it's just like, yeah, man, talk about submissive, being conditioned, you know, it's disturbing as hell. But yeah, that's the only reason that I kind of use the term in a more like umbrella fashion. You know what I mean? But I do agree with you entirely. Yeah.
I think it's easier for people to try to get out what you're saying just by using that as a broad term. No, I get that. But Austin, again, thank you for coming on. Please let everybody know where they can find all your amazing work again.
Of course, man. Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. I really do love these conversations, and hopefully I wasn't too like, I feel like my mind works a little schizophrenic and sporadic at times, and again, I didn't eat today, so that doesn't help with the clarity of my vision when I'm discussing certain ideas. Thank you very much.
It was great.
But yeah, I love these conversations and meeting people who are emotionally affected in similar ways. Yeah, it gives me hope, man. You know what I mean? So I can't thank you enough just for the ability to have these open-minded conversations and kind of legitimately grapple with some of the most difficult details that you could really face in an objective way. And so, but anyway, yeah, you guys can all find me at the Underclass Podcast. Definitely best place to support me is patreon.com/the underclass podcast. I have a paywalled show there for just, at least there's some incentive for listeners who, even at the $3 tier level, you can gain access to it. It's called Whatever This Is. And it's me and Brad Binkley from the Propaganda Report and Sam Tripoli from Tinfoil Hat. And it's been a lot of fun. Actually, I saw them text me earlier, and I better text them back soon because I think they're going to try and do the show today. So anyway, but yeah, that's definitely the best place to support me. And but yeah, beyond that, I have a show every Tuesday night. Typically it's at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. It's called Already Dead. We do it. It's a call-in show. After 40,
I have you plug that if you didn't. I was going to say you have a live show. Let everybody know.
Thank you. I know I've been so bad about plugging that for some reason. I can't ever remember to. I'm bad about my plugs in general. I'm always just like, thank you guys. But so yeah.
Yeah. When is it? I interrupted you, so let everybody know again. When
oh, you're good, brother. Yeah. So every Tuesday night, Already Dead, 9:30 Eastern time, 45 minutes, kind of shooting the bull, and then we do another, however long. Just kind of hanging out with the patrons or whoever calls in, and it's a good time. We talk a little bit more about current events, more than and then also like whatever we're spurging on at the time for my personal solo projects from the underclass that I'm pursuing and things of that nature. My most recent one was the Atlanta child murders and Wayne Williams, and yeah. Safe to say I didn't expect an Iran-Contra connection there and things of that nature. But, hey, that gets a lot deeper. But yeah, so I encourage anybody who's interested, go check that one out. And I did an interview about it as well with William Ramsey. It was a lot of fun, pretty well received. So check that out. And beyond that, I think we're having me and Jules are going to have Donut on, I think, on Tuesday. So
nice.
That'll be fun, man. Especially the event 201 ritual.
Gray Pilled, right? Jules from
Gray Pilled? Yep.
Yes. He also goes on your Already Dead sometimes as well, correct?
Yeah. Well, we made him the producer after Adam from Deborah Gets Red Pilled decided, he had too much going on. He had stopped doing the show anyway, and was just trying to focus on jiu-jitsu and homesteading a little bit more, which I admire very much. But so whenever he decided he was going to bow out, Jules just offered his, he's like, hey man, I'll do it. And so Jose and I gave him we brought him in. It's been a lot of fun. So he's the producer, and we just kind of try and bring sort of levity to the situation in a way, with make it a more casual thing. I think it's very important to decompress, but with people that you are comfortable with, where you can kind of like, make it a more enjoyable, laughable, it brings me back down to earth after I'm sitting there by myself for 12 hours, like reading the most disturbing details you could imagine. I kind of need that outlet. So that's nice to have, definitely. And Jose Galason's my co-host from No Way Jose. I love him to death. He's my brother. And beyond that, thank you again, guys. Honestly, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Real quick, Tyrone, you want to plug? You want to let everybody know what's up?
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, everything you can find about me is on my website, rebirthoftheword.com. I'm a bestseller, Journey Through the Origins of History, that can be found on Amazon. I do YouTube and all that stuff, but everything that you want to know about me can be found on my website. It's a blog, of course, but I take little snippets of what I've learned and I put it in a little blog. Then I go take that and put it into my YouTube channel and Spotify and all that other stuff. So yeah, I appreciate it, Nick, for letting me come here again, man. Sorry I was late, man. I'm telling you, I'm not going to let that happen again, bro. I'm definitely going to be on it this time. Can't let that happen. I don't like that. I was in the military, man. I hated being late. That was like my eve, bro. So it was kind of.
I was thinking about that. I was like, I think now on, when I make like the link to send out to everybody, I'll specify the time in it, so then nobody gets confused. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Because it has happened to other people besides you. It's happened to Julia and other people. So it's quite all right, my man.
What's important is that you came, Tyrone. That's all. That's important.
I really do appreciate it. I learned so much just listening to you guys and sharing stuff. Austin, you did great, man. Because I'm telling you, I'm gonna go back and read that Norse mythology book just because of what you said. And I'm gonna go grab a couple of other ones that I have in the other room, and I'm gonna be on it like white on rice, baby.
Awesome, man. I'm gonna buy that book now that you showed me too. What was the author of that book?
It's just it's not necessarily one book. I think you can get. I think it's a collection, but it's by Jake Jackson, Jake Jackson. He has a whole bunch of them, bro. I mean, like mythologies from everywhere, man. This is not even half of it, right, or a quarter of it, or any. It's like a stack of them, bro. And the only reason why I pulled this one out was because, of course, it was part of the Norse mythology one. So.
Right. That's awesome, dude. I love it.
Thank you again. Thank you again. I appreciate it. I'm glad you made it, man. And last but not least, Lisa, what is going on?
Thank you, Austin. That was an amazing, very thorough, very in-depth discussion of Delphi. You covered everything almost from the beginning, the intricacies, everything, court, suspects, all kinds of little intricate details that I had heard literally from here and there whenever you synthesized it all in one. And I'm really, really proud of this episode, because if you want to know everything there is to know about Delphi, listen to this episode, because you literally it all together in a review, like literally. That's it. And so I feel very honored and privileged to have been on this episode with you, presenting it the way that you did.
Thank you so much.
I love the discussions that Nick has enabled all of us to have at Tor, and so very, very honored, blessed to be a part of it and to be a part of the discussion. And the only thing I like to plug is occultresearchinstitute.org.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And again, thank you all. I mean, that was a long one too. I appreciate all your time. And thank you everybody in the chat. There was a lot of people in the chat that was here from the beginning to the end. I mean, that was a long one. There was a whole bunch of new people. That's what's up. Thank you. And you all had great stuff to add too.
Oh,
that's
absolutely. The chat, the new people. Thank y'all, because y'all brought so much to the table. And Tyrone, that's also some of the things that I love, is that you pull up the images on the screen because it gives visual, and then all of the books. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, it was definitely awesome. And thank you for the new people jumping on. And again, you can check our stuff out also on BitChute, Rumble, and on audio podcasts. I will say that the audio will have more episodes than what you see on YouTube, because I won't censor the show, but I just won't put it on YouTube. So if you want to check it out, there will be more stuff on the audio, obviously. But again, thank you all. And Austin, amazing work. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.